the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a stolen sapphire brooch sparks a mystery that unravels a decades-old secret. When Miss Jane Marple finds a singed photograph from 1925, hidden in Willow Manor's dusty library, she uncovers a tale of greed, betrayal, and a fire that hid the truth. With a vanished boy, a suspicious lawyer, and a family haunted by their past, Miss Marple knits together clues to reveal a shocking connection to a lost inheritance. Will her sharp eyes solve the case before the manor's shadows claim another victim? Chapter 1. The Quiet Village, the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, where the sun always seemed to shine just right on the neat little cottages. Miss Jane Marple sat by her window, her knitting needles clicking softly. The yarn in her hands was a soft blue, like the sky on a perfect summer day, and she worked it into a scarf with the kind of care that only someone who loved small, quiet things could manage. Her cottage, with its rose-covered walls and tidy garden, was the kind of place where nothing much ever happened. At least, that's what people thought. But Miss Marple knew better. In a village like St. Mary Mead, secrets hid behind every smile, and the smallest detail could unravel a story no one saw coming. From her chair, Miss Marple could see the whole village spread out like a picture book. There was the post office, where Mrs. Weatherby gossiped about everyone's letters. The bakery, where young Tom Baker burned his pies more often than not. And the church, with its old stone tower that rang bells every Sunday. Today, though, her sharp blue eyes were fixed on something new, a big, fancy car rolling slowly down the lane toward Willow Manor, the grand old house at the edge of the village. It had been empty for years, its windows dark and its garden wild, but now it was coming to life again. The Harrisons, a new family, had moved in just yesterday, and the village was buzzing with talk about them. Miss Marple's needles paused as she watched the car disappear behind the manor's tall gates. She didn't need to hear the gossip to know something was up. New people in St. Mary Mead always brought a bit of mystery, and the Harrisons seemed like the kind who carried more than most. She leaned closer to the window, her mind already picking at the details like a loose thread on her scarf. The car was shiny, too shiny for a village like this, and the man driving it, Mr. Harrison, she'd heard had a stiff, serious look about him. His wife Clara was younger, with bright blonde hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Then there was their son, Edward, a tall, quiet boy who kept his head down as if he didn't want anyone to notice him. And there was a fourth person, someone the village hadn't quite figured out yet, the man called Dr. Langley, who arrived with the family but didn't seem to fit. Miss Marple smiled to herself. People were like puzzles, and she'd always been good at puzzles. She didn't need to chase after clues or ask nosy questions. She just watched, listened, and let the pieces fall into place. The Harrisons, she thought, were a puzzle worth solving. The village had been talking about the Harrisons for weeks, ever since word got out that Willow Manor had been sold. Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple's best friend, had stopped by just yesterday with a cup of tea and a head full of stories. There, rich Jane, she'd said, her eyes wide. Rich as anything, but no one knows where the money comes from. Mr. Harrison says he's in business, but what kind of business? And Clara, she's so young, barely 30, I'd say. Why would she marry an old grump like him? Mrs. Bantry had leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. And that Dr. Langley, he's no doctor, I'll bet. Probably a cousin or something, living off their money. Miss Marple hadn't said much, just nodded and sipped her tea. She didn't need to add to the gossip. Gossip was like a river, it flowed whether you helped it or not. But she tucked every word away, storing it in her mind like yarn in a basket. Mrs. Bantry's stories were often wild, but there was always a grain of truth in them, and Miss Marple was good at finding those grains. Now, as she watched the Manors gates swing shut, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Willow Manor itself. It was the kind of house that looked like it belonged in a storybook, with tall chimneys and ivy climbing up its stone walls. But it had a sad history. Years ago, back in the 1920s, it belonged to a family called the Westons. There'd been a fire one night, a bad one, and a young woman named Evelyn Weston had vanished. Some said she died in the flames, others that she ran off with a lover. The house had been empty ever since, its rooms locked up tight, its secrets buried under dust. Miss Marple wondered if the Harrisons knew about the Manor's past. She wondered if they cared. Her needles started clicking again, slow and steady, as she thought about the village. St. Mary Mead was small, but it had a way of pulling secrets out into the open. People here noticed everything, the way someone walked, the letters they got, the curtains they forgot to close. Miss Marple loved that about her village. It wasn't nosy, not really. It was just alive, like a big, breathing puzzle that kept her mind sharp. She'd solved plenty of mysteries here, from stolen chickens to missing jewels, and each one started the same way, with a tiny detail no one else noticed. The clock on her mantel chimed noon, and Miss Marple set her knitting down. It was time for her daily walk, a habit she'd kept for years. She put on her favourite hutter, soft grey one, with a little feather, and picked up her walking stick, though she didn't really need it. It was more for show, something to make people think she was just a sweet old lady who liked her garden and her tea. But Miss Marple was more than that. She was a watcher, a listener, a finder of truths. The lane outside her cottage was quiet, except for the hum of bees and the chirp of birds. She walked slowly, her eyes taking in every detail: the fresh paint on Mrs. Weatherby's gate, the muddy boots outside Tom Baker's shop, the new roses climbing up the vicarage wall. As she passed the post office, Mrs. Weatherby waved from the window. "Morning, Miss Marple. Heard about the Harrisons' party yet?" Miss Marple stopped, her smile polite. "Party, Mrs. Weatherby? Oh yes." Mrs. Weatherby leaned out, her voice bubbling with excitement. "They're having a big garden party at Willow Manor tomorrow. Everyone's invited, well, everyone. Who matters? They sent out fancy cards, gold edges and all. Wants to show off, I reckon." Miss Marple nodded, her mind already turning. A garden party was the perfect place to watch people, to see who smiled too much or not enough, who stood too close or too far away. "That sounds lovely," she said. "I'll be sure to go." Mrs. Weatherby grinned, happy to have shared the news. "You'll see, Miss Marple, those Harrisons are up to something. Mark my words." Miss Marple didn't argue. She just tipped her hat and kept walking, her stick tapping lightly on the path. Up to something. That's what everyone thought about new people, but Miss Marple knew it wasn't always true. Sometimes people were just nervous, or shy, or hiding something small, like a debt or a bad marriage. But sometimes they were hiding something bigger, and Miss Marple had a feeling the Harrisons were the bigger kind. By the time she reached the edge of the village, the sun was high, and Willow Manor loomed ahead like a sleeping giant. Its gates were iron, rusted in places but newly oiled, and the gravel drive was swept clean. Miss Marple stopped to admire the roses along the fence, though her eyes were really on the house. A curtain twitched in one of the upper windows, and she caught a glimpse of blonde-hair Clara Harrison, maybe watching the world outside. Or watching her. Miss Marple turned away, pretending to fuss with her hat. She didn't want to be caught staring, not yet. But her mind was busy, piecing together what she'd seen and heard. A rich family, a big house, a mysterious guest, and a village full of whispers. It was like the start of one of her favorite books, the kind where the first chapter was all sunshine and smiles, but the shadows were already creeping in. As she walked back toward her cottage, Miss Marple thought about the garden party. She'd wear her best dress, the blue one with the lace collar, and she'd bring her knitting just to keep her hands busy. People talked more when they thought you weren't listening, and Miss Marple was very good at not looking like she was listening. She'd watched the Harrisons, and Dr. Langley, and young Edward. She'd noticed the little things, the way they looked at each other, the words they didn't say, the secrets they tried to hide. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple settled into her chair again, her knitting in her lap. The village was quiet now, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows across the lane. She picked up her needles, the soft click-click filling the room. Outside, St. Mary Mead looked as peaceful as ever, but Miss Marple knew better. Somewhere, in that big house, behind those tall gates, a story was waiting to be told, and she was just the person to find it. The rest of the day passed in its usual gentle rhythm. Miss Marple made herself a pot of tea, the kind with just a hint of bergamot, and nibbled on a biscuit while she read the morning paper. The headlines were all about faraway and politics and things that seemed so big compared to St. Mary Mead. But Miss Marple knew that big things could happen in small places, too. A stolen jewel, a whispered secret, a photograph tucked away where no one was supposed to find it. Those were the things that could turn a quiet village upside down. She thought about Willow Manor again, about the fire all those years ago. She'd been young then, not much older than Clara Harrison was now, and she remembered the talk in the village. Evelyn Weston, the girl who vanished, had been beautiful, with dark hair and a laugh that made people turn their heads. Some said she'd run off to London, others that she'd died in the flames. Miss Marple hadn't thought much of it. At the time she'd been busy with her own life, her own small worries. But now, with the Harrisons in that house, the old story felt alive again, like a ghost tapping at the window. She finished her tea and set the cup down, her eyes drifting to the window. The manor was too far to see from here, but she could picture it, the tall chimneys, the ivy, the secrets. She wondered about the photograph Mrs. Weatherby hadn't mentioned, because no one knew about it yet. Miss Marple hadn't seen it herself, but she had a feeling it was there, hidden in a drawer or a book, waiting for someone to find it. Photographs were like that. They held moments, froze them in time, and sometimes they held truths no one wanted to see. The clock chimed again, and Miss Marple realized it was nearly time for supper. She'd make something simple, maybe a bit of soup and some bread from Tom Baker's shop, even if it was a little burnt. As she moved to the kitchen, her mind stayed on the Harrisons. She thought about Clara's smile, the one that didn't reach her eyes, and Edward's quiet steps, like he was afraid of being seen. And Dr. Langley, what was he doing with a family like that? A doctor, Mrs. Bantry had said, but Miss Marple wasn't so sure. Doctors didn't sneak around with young men in churchyards, not unless they had something to hide. She stirred the soup, the steam rising in soft curls, and let her thoughts wander. The garden party would be tomorrow, and she'd be ready. She'd watch, listen, and wait for the moment when the puzzle started to make sense. because that's what Miss Marple did. She found the pieces, the little bits of truth that others missed, and she put them together until the whole picture was clear. As the sun set over St. Mary Mead, painting the sky pink and gold, Miss Marple sat down to her supper. The village was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt full, like it was holding its breath. She took a sip of soup, her eyes on the window, and smiled to herself. Tomorrow, at Willow Manor, the story would begin, and Miss Jane Marple would be there, knitting in hand, ready to unravel it. Chapter 2. The Garden Party Invitation. The morning of the garden party dawned bright and clear in St. Mary Mead, with the kind of sunshine that made everything look just a little prettier than usual. Miss Jane Marple stood in her small bedroom, smoothing the folds of her best blue dress, the one with a delicate lace collar that she saved for special occasions. She checked her reflection in the mirror, her sharp blue eyes twinkling under the brim of her grey hat with its little feather. The dress was old-fashioned, but it suited her, and Miss Marple knew the value of looking like a harmless old lady. People let their guard down around someone like that, and she was counting on it today. She picked up her knitting bag, slipping in a ball of soft blue yarn and her favourite needles. Knitting was perfect for a garden party. It kept her hands busy and her eyes free to watch. And there would be plenty to watch at Willow Manor. She was sure of it. The Harrisons' invitation had caused a stir in the village, with its fancy gold-edged cards and promise of a grand afternoon. Everyone was talking about it. Mrs. Weatherby at the post office, Tom Baker at the bakery, even the vicar, who rarely cared for such things. Miss Marple smiled to herself as she stepped out of her cottage, her walking stick tapping lightly on the path. A party like this wasn't just about tea and cakes. It was a chance to see the Harrisons up close, to catch the little looks and words that told more than any gossip could. The lane to Willow Manor was alive with villagers, all dressed in their Sunday best, chattering like sparrows as they walked. Miss Marple fell into step behind Mrs. Bantry, who was wearing a bright red hat that looked like it was trying to outshine the sun. "Jane," Mrs. Bantry called, turning with a grin, "you're looking very smart. Ready to see what those Harrisons are all about?" "Oh, I'm just looking forward to a nice afternoon," Miss Marple said, her voice mild. "It's kind of them to invite us all." Mrs. Bantry snorted. "Kind, my foot. They're showing off, that's what it is. All that money, and no one knows where it comes from. Mark my words, Jane, there's something funny about that family." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes on the road ahead. Mrs. Bantry was always quick to judge, but she wasn't always wrong. There was something about the Harrisons, Mr. Harrison's stiff manners, Clara's nervous smile, Edward's quiet way of slipping out of sight, that made Miss Marple's mind itch like a stitch that wasn't quite right in her knitting. And then there was Dr. Langley, the man who didn't fit. She'd heard more about him since yesterday, bits and pieces from the village grapevine. He was staying at the manor, not as a guest, but as something else, maybe a friend, maybe more. No one was sure, and that made Miss Marple curious. Willow Manor came into view as they rounded a bend, its stone walls glowing in the sunlight. The gates were open wide, and the gravel drive was lined with roses, their petals bright against the green. A big white tent stood on the lawn, with tables covered in crisp white cloths and plates piled high with sandwiches, scones, and tiny cakes. Music floated from somewhere, violin, soft and sweet-hand. Servants in neat uniforms moved among the guests, offering glasses of lemonade and something stronger for those who wanted it. The Harrisons had spared no expense, and the village was impressed. Though Miss Marple knew they'd be talking about it for weeks, picking apart every detail, she stepped onto the lawn, her stick sinking slightly into the grass, and took it all in. The tent was crowded with familiar faces. Mrs. Weatherby, fussing over a plate of scones. Tom Baker, looking uncomfortable in a tight collar. The vicar, nodding politely as he sipped his tea. But Miss Marple's eyes were drawn to the Harrisons. Standing near the centre of the tent like actors on a stage. Mr. Harrison was tall and thin, with grey hair and a face that looked like it didn't know how to smile. He wore a dark suit, too formal for a garden party, and his hand rested on Clara's arm as if to keep her in place. Clara was the opposite, bright and sparkling, her blonde hair pinned up under a wide hat, her dress a soft pink that caught the light. But her smile was tight, and her eyes darted around, like she was looking for someone or something. Edward, their son, stood a little apart, his hands in his pockets. He was about 20, tall like his father but with his mother's fair hair. He kept his head down, his shoulders hunched, as if he wanted to disappear into the crowd. Miss Marple watched him for a moment, noting the way his eyes flicked toward the manor's windows, then away. He was nervous, she thought, but not just shy. There was something weighing on him, something heavy. And then there was Dr. Langley. He was older than Mr. Harrison, with a round face and glasses that made him look like a kindly uncle. But there was nothing kindly about the way he watched the crowd, his eyes sharp and calculating. He stood near Clara, too close for a guest, and Miss Marple noticed how she leaned away from him just a little when he spoke. There was a story there, Miss Marple was sure, and she meant to find out what it was. She found a seat at a small table near the edge of the tent, where she could see everything without being noticed. Her knitting came out, the needles clicking softly as she worked on her scarf. It was a good spot, close enough to hear the chatter, far enough to seem unimportant. She smiled at Mrs. Bantry, who plopped down beside her with a plate of cakes. "Well, Jane," Mrs. Bantry said, her voice loud enough to carry, "what do you make of all this? Look at Clara Harrison, acting like she's the Queen of England. And that Dr. Langley, he's got a sly look, don't you think?" Miss Marple's needles didn't stop. "They seem very welcoming," she said, her tone gentle. "It's a lovely party." Mrs. Bantry rolled her eyes. "You're too nice, Jane. I'm telling you, there's something off about them. Did you see how Clara keeps looking at the house, like she's afraid of it?" Miss Marple nodded, though she didn't say anything. She'd seen it too, the way Clara's eyes kept drifting to the manor's tall windows, the way her fingers twisted the edge of her shawl. Fear, maybe, or guilt, or both. Miss Marple filed it away like a stitch in her pattern and turned her attention to the other guests. The party was in full swing now, with laughter and chatter filling the air. Children ran across the lawn, chasing each other through the rose bushes, while their parents sipped drinks and swapped stories. Miss Marple listened, her ears catching snippets of conversation. Most of it was harmless talk about the weather, the price of eggs, the new curtains at the vicarage. But every now and then she heard something about the Harrisons. "Rich as anything," one woman whispered. "But why come here, to a poky little village?" said another. "That boy of theirs doesn't say a word," grumbled old Mr. Gibbs, the manor's caretaker, who was sitting at a nearby table with a glass of something strong. Miss Marple's needles paused as she leaned a little closer, pretending to fix a dropped stitch. Mr. Gibbs was old, older than her, with a face like a wrinkled apple. He'd worked at Willow Manor for years, even before the fire, and he knew its secrets better than anyone. That Edward, he was saying. To the man next to him, he's not like his father. Too quiet, too sneaky. Always poking around the old library, like he's looking for something. The man, a farmer named John Price, shrugged. Boys are like that. Probably just bored. Maybe, Mr. Gibbs said, but his voice was low, suspicious. But there's something in that house. Always has been. Ever since the fire. Miss Marple's heart gave a little jump, though her face stayed calm. The fire. She'd thought about it yesterday. The old story of Evelyn Weston and the night Willow Manor burned. She wanted to ask Mr. Gibbs more, but she knew better than to push. People clammed up when you asked too many questions. Better to wait, to let them talk when they thought no one was listening. She turned her eyes back to the Harrisons. Mr. Harrison was talking to the vicar now, his voice loud and important, like he was used to being heard. Clara was still at his side, but her smile was fading, and she kept glancing at Dr. Langley, who was now chatting with a group of women near the tea table. Edward had disappeared, Miss Marple noticed, and she wondered where he'd gone. To the library, maybe, like Mr. Gibbs had said. The music changed, the violin giving way to a livelier tune, and some of the younger guests started to dance on the grass. Miss Marple watched, her needles moving steadily. She liked parties like this, not for the dancing or the food, but for the way people showed themselves. A laugh that was too loud, a hand that lingered too long, a glance that held a secret. Those were the things that told her who people really were. She was just starting to wonder if she should get a cup of tea when she heard it. A sharp, angry voice coming from the direction of the manor. It was muffled, hidden by the music and the chatter, but Miss Marple's ears were sharp. She set her knitting down and turned her head, trying to find the source. The voices were coming from the side of the house, near the old library windows, which were half hidden by ivy. Carefully, she stood, brushing off her dress. "I think I'll stretch my legs," she said to Mrs. Bantry, who was busy with a second cake and didn't notice. Miss Marple moved slowly, her stick tapping the ground, making her way toward the roses that lined the manor's walls. She didn't want to look like she was snooping, though that was exactly what she was doing. The voices grew clearer as she got closer, and she recognized them. Mr. Harrison and someone else, Dr. Langley, she thought. "You can't keep this up," Mr. Harrison was saying, his voice low but sharp, like a knife under velvet. "It's too dangerous. If anyone finds out, they won't." Dr. Langley cut in, his tone smoother, almost mocking. "You worry too much, George. It's been years. No one's looking anymore." Miss Marple froze, her hand resting on a rosebush. She was hidden by the ivy now, out of sight, but close enough to hear every word. Her heart beat a little faster, not from fear, but from excitement. This was the kind of moment she lived for, when the puzzle pieces started to show themselves. "You don't understand," Mr. Harrison snapped. "This isn't London. People talk here. They notice things. That old woman, the one with the knit, was watching us." Miss Marple's lips twitched into a smile. So they'd noticed her. That was interesting. She held her breath, waiting for more. "You're paranoid," Dr. Langley said. "She's just a nosy old lady. They're all like that in places like this. Keep your head, George, and we'll be fine." The boy doesn't even know. The boy, Edward, Miss Marple thought. What didn't he know? And what were they so afraid of someone finding out? She wanted to stay, to hear more, but footsteps crunched on the gravel, and she knew they were moving away. She stepped back, pretending to admire the roses, just as Clara Harrison appeared around the corner. "Oh, Miss Marple," Clara said, her voice bright but a little too high. "Enjoying the flowers. They're my pride and joy." "They're lovely," Miss Marple said, her smile as soft as ever. "You've done wonders with the garden already." Clara's cheeks flushed, and she twisted her shawl again. "Thank you. It's been a lot of work. Moving here, you know. So much to do." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes kind but sharp. Clara was nervous, more nervous than a garden party should make her. And there was something in her eyes, a flicker of worry, like she was waiting for something to go wrong. "It's a beautiful house," Miss Marple said. "So much history. I remember when the Westons lived here, years ago." Clara's smile froze, just for a second. "The Westons," she said, her voice tight. I don't know much about them." "Oh, just an old family," Miss Marple said, as if it didn't matter. "There was a fire, you know. A sad story. But that was long ago." Clara nodded, her fingers tightening on her shawl. "Yes, long ago," she echoed, then glanced at the house. "I should check on the guests. Excuse me, Miss Marple." She hurried away, her pink dress fluttering, and Miss Marple watched her go. Clara knew something about the Westons, or at least about the fire. That much was clear. And Mr. Harrison and Dr. Langley, they were hiding something. Something big enough to argue about in whispers. Miss Marple made her way back to the tent, her mind buzzing like the bees in the roses. She settled into her chair, picking up her knitting as if nothing had happened. Mrs. Bantry was still there, now talking to Mrs. Weatherby about the price of sugar. Miss Marple listened with half an ear, her thoughts on what she'd heard. "No one's looking anymore," Dr. Langley had said. Looking for what? Or who? And why was Mr. Harrison so worried about her, a harmless old lady with her knitting? The party went on, the sun climbing higher, the laughter growing louder. Edward reappeared, standing near the edge of the lawn, his eyes on his mother. Miss Marple watched him, noting the way he clenched his fists, the way he glanced at Dr. Langley with something like anger. There was a story there, a tangle of secrets that connected the Harrisons and their mysterious guest. And somewhere in that tangle, Miss Marple was sure, was the truth about Willow Manor. As the afternoon wore on, she sipped her tea and nibbled a scone, her needles clicking steadily. The party was lovely, just as she'd said, but it was more than that. It was a window into the Harrisons' world, a chance to see the cracks in their perfect picture, and Miss Marple was very good at finding cracks by the time the sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the lawn. The guests were starting to leave. Miss Marple said her goodbyes, thanking Clara for a wonderful afternoon. Clara's smile was back, but it was still too tight, and her eyes still darted to the house. Mr. Harrison shook her hand, his grip firm but his face cold. Dr. Langley just nodded, his glasses glinting in the fading light. Edward was nowhere to be seen. Miss Marple walked home slowly, her stick tapping the path, her knitting bag swinging at her side. The village was quiet now, settling into the evening, but her mind was far from quiet. She thought about the argument she'd overheard, about Clara's nervous hands, about Edward's angry eyes. She thought about the fire all those years ago and the girl who vanished. And she thought about the photograph, the one she hadn't seen yet but felt sure was waiting somewhere in that house, back in her cottage. She lit a lamp and settled into her chair, her knitting in her lap. The scarf was growing, stitch by stitch, just like the mystery. She didn't have all the pieces yet, but she had enough to start. The Harrisons were hiding something, and Dr. Langley was part of it. Edward knew something, too, even if he didn't know it all, and Willow Manor well. That old house had secrets of its own, secrets that might be tied to a long-ago fire, and a girl named Evelyn. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, the only sound in the quiet room. Tomorrow she'd talk to Mr. Gibbs, the caretaker. He knew the manor better than anyone, and he might know something about that fire, something that would make the puzzle clearer. For now, though she was content to sit and think, letting the pieces settle in her mind like yarn in a basket, the village slept, but Miss Marple's mind was awake, turning over the day's clues. The garden party had been more than a party. It had been the start of something, the first thread in a story that was just beginning to unravel. And Miss Jane Marple, with her knitting and her sharp eyes, was ready to pull that thread. Chapter 3. The Missing Heirloom, the morning after the garden party. St. Mary Mead woke to a sky heavy with clouds, the kind that promised rain but hadn't made up their mind yet. Miss Jane Marple was up early, as always, tending to her roses, before the day got too warm. Her cottage garden was her pride, with its neat rows of flowers and the little bench where she liked to sit and think. Today, though her thoughts were not on roses, but on Willow Manor and the people she'd watched yesterday, the Harrisons, with their polished smiles and nervous glances, had left an impression like a pattern in her knitting that didn't quite line up. And that argument she'd overheard Mr. Harrison and Dr. Langley whispering about secrets and danger had stayed with her, turning over in her mind like a loose stitch. She was just clipping a faded bloom when she heard footsteps on the lane. It was Mrs. Weatherby, the postmistress, hurrying along with her scarf flapping and her face full of news. "Miss Marple," she called, waving as if the world depended on it. "Have you heard? There's been a theft at Willow Manor." Miss Marple's scissors paused, but her face stayed calm, her blue eyes gentle under her straw hat. "A theft?" "Mrs. Weatherby," she said, as if it were no more surprising than a change in the weather. "Do tell." Mrs. Weatherby leaned over the garden gate, her voice dropping to a thrilled whisper. "Clara Harrison's sapphire brooch gone. Right out of her bedroom, they say. She found it missing this morning, and now the whole house is in an uproar. They've called for Inspector Craddock, and he's on his way from Much Benham. A proper scandal, that's what it is." Miss Marple nodded, her mind already working. A sapphire brooch was no small thing, valuable, sentimental, the kind of heirloom people kept close. And to have it stolen the night of a big party, with half the village traipsing through the manor's gardens, well, that was interesting. "How dreadful for Mrs. Harrison," she said, her voice soft. "I suppose they have no idea who might have taken it." "Not a clue," Mrs. Weatherby said, her eyes wide. "But you know how people talk. Some say it was one of the servants theirs, a new housemaid, Lily, who's only been there a week. Others think it was an outsider, someone who slipped in during the party. And then there's Edward, that sulky boy of theirs. Wouldn't put it past him to cause trouble." Miss Marple smiled faintly, tucking her scissors into her apron pocket. "People do love to guess," she said. "I'm sure Inspector Craddock will sort it out. He's very thorough." Mrs. Weatherby snorted. "He'll need to be, with that lot. The Harrisons are acting like they're above it all, but I heard Clara was in tears, and Mr. Harrison's been shouting at everyone, and that Dr. Langley, he just sits there, cool as you please, like it's none of his business." Miss Marple's ears pricked at the mention of Dr. Langley. She remembered his sharp eyes at the party, the way he'd stood too close to Clara, the way he'd mocked Mr. Harrison in that whispered argument. "Thank you for telling me, Mrs. Weatherby," she said. "I'll pop up to the manor later, perhaps, to offer my sympathies. Poor Mrs. Harrison must be upset." Mrs. Weatherby beamed, happy to have shared the gossip. "You do that, Miss Marple, and keep your eyes open. You're good at noticing things." She hurried off, no doubt to spread the news to the bakery or the vicarage. Miss Marple went back to her roses, but her mind was elsewhere. A stolen brooch, a house full of secrets, and a family that didn't quite fit together. It was the kind of puzzle she loved, the kind that started with something smaller missing, jewel, and grew into something much bigger. She finished her gardening, put away her tools, and went inside to change. Her blue dress from yesterday was too fine for a morning visit, so she chose a simple grey one, with a shawl and her usual hat. Her knitting bag came too, as always, because you never knew when a quiet moment might let you overhear something useful. The walk to Willow Manor was pleasant, even with the clouds overhead. The village was buzzing, as it always did when something exciting happened. Miss Marple passed Tom Baker sweeping his shop steps, who gave her a nod and a muttered, "Heard about the brooch." Then she smiled and kept walking, noting the curious faces peeking from windows. By the time she reached the manor's gates, the air felt heavier, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The gates were open, and a police car was parked in the drive, its blue paint dull under the cloudy sky. Inspector Craddock's car, Miss Marple thought, recognizing it from other cases he'd handled in St. Mary Mead. He was a good policeman, young and earnest, with a quick mind but a tendency to miss the human side of things. That's where Miss Marple came in. She didn't solve crimes with fingerprints or alibis, but with people, what they said, what they didn't say, and what their eyes told you when their words lied. She knocked at the manor's big oak door, and it was opened by Lily, the new housemaid Mrs. Weatherby had mentioned. Lily was young, barely 20, with a round face and nervous hands that twisted her apron. "Oh, Miss Marple," she said, her voice shaky, "it's a bad day here. Mrs. Harrison's in a state." "I heard about the brooch," Miss Marple said kindly. "I thought I'd see if I could help. May I come in?" Lily hesitated, then nodded and stepped aside. The manor's hall was grand but cold, with dark wood panels and a staircase that curved up into shadows. Miss Marple followed Lily to the drawing room, where Clara Harrison sat on a velvet sofa, her face pale and her hands clutching a handkerchief. Mr. Harrison stood by the fireplace, his arms crossed, his face like thunder. Inspector Craddock was there too, a notebook in his hand, his dark hair neat as always. Dr. Langley sat in a corner, his glasses glinting as he watched the room, and Edward slouched in a chair near the window, staring at the floor. "Miss Marple," Clara said, her voice breaking as she stood. "How kind of you to come. It's awful. My brooch, it's gone. It was my grandmother's, worth a fortune, and now—" She trailed off, dabbing her eyes. There, Mrs. Harrison," Miss Marple said, patting her arm. "I'm sure Inspector Craddock will find it. He's very good at these things." Craddock looked up, a small smile on his face. "Good to see you, Miss Marple, though I'm not sure there's much for you to do here. It's a straightforward theft, I expect. Someone took advantage of the party." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes moving over the room. Clara's tears seemed real, but there was something in her posture, a stiffness, that didn't quite match. Mr. Harrison's anger was real enough. He was practically glaring at Craddock, but there was a flicker of worry in his eyes, too. Dr. Langley was to calm, his hands folded neatly, his face unreadable. And poor Edward looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Tell me about the brooch," Craddock said, his pen poised. "When did you last see it?" Clara sniffed. "Last night, before the party. I was going to wear it, but it didn't match my dress, so I left it in my jewelry box, in my bedroom. This morning, when I went to check, it was gone." "Locked, was it?" Craddock asked. "Yes, but, well, the lock's not very strong. It's an old box." Clara glanced at her husband, then away. Mr. Harrison spoke up, his voice sharp. "The point is, someone broke in and took it. Probably one of the guests. Half the village was here, traipsing through our garden." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she took out her knitting, settling into a chair near Clara. "It must be so upsetting," she said. "Was the bedroom door locked?" Clara hesitated. I think so. I mean, it should have been. Craddock's eyebrows went up. "You're not sure?" "Well, with the party, things were so busy." Clara's voice trailed off, and she looked at Dr. Langley as if for help. Langley leaned forward, his voice smooth. "It was a chaotic evening, Inspector. People coming and going, servants running about. It's no surprise a door was left unlocked. Anyone could have slipped upstairs." Miss Marple's needles didn't stop, but her eyes flicked to Langley. He was quick to explain, too quick, and his tone was just a little too calm. She wondered what he wasn't saying. Craddock scribbled in his notebook. "Right, we'll need a list of everyone at the party, and I'll have my men check the house. Fingerprints, footprints, anything that might help. Miss Marple, you were here yesterday. Did you see anything odd?" Miss Marple's smile was gentle, almost vague. "Oh, I'm just an old lady, Inspector. I was too busy enjoying the scones to notice much, but it was a lovely party. So many people, all so cheerful," Craddock chuckled, used to her ways. "I'm sure you noticed something. You always do." She didn't answer, just kept knitting, her eyes moving over the room. Edward was still staring at the floor, but his hands were tight on the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. Mr. Harrison was pacing now, muttering about village thieves and no respect. Clara was dabbing her eyes again, but Miss Marple noticed her glance at Langley, quick and sharp, before looking away. And Langley, he was watching her, Miss Marple realized, his glasses catching the light as he studied her. "I'd like to help, if I may," Miss Marple said, her voice soft. "I could talk to some of the villagers, see if they saw anything. People do chat, you know." Craddock nodded. "That'd be helpful, Miss Marple. Just don't go stirring up trouble." "Oh, I never stir," she said, her smile innocent. But her mind was already stirring, picking at the puzzle. A brooch didn't just vanish, not one as valuable as Clara described. And the Harrisons weren't telling the whole truth. She could feel it, like a snag in her yarn. The rest of the morning passed in a flurry of questions. Craddock interviewed Lily, who was near tears, swearing she hadn't touched the brooch. He spoke to the other servants, a cook and a gardener, who both said they'd been too busy with the party to notice anything. Mr. Harrison kept insisting it was an outsider, someone who'd sneaked in during the chaos. Clara stayed quiet, her handkerchief crumpled in her hand. Edward said nothing at all, though Miss Marple noticed him slip out of the room when Craddock wasn't looking. She stayed as long as she could, knitting and listening, her eyes missing nothing. The drawing room was full of clues, if you knew where to look. The way Clara avoided her husband's gaze, the way Langley's fingers tapped his knee when Craddock asked about the party, The way Edward's chair was angled toward the door, like he was ready to run. Miss Marple didn't know what it all meant yet, but she would. Puzzles always came together, if you were patient, by noon. Craddock was ready to leave, promising to return with his men for a proper search. "We'll find that brooch, Mrs. Harrison," he said. "Don't worry." Clara nodded, but her smile was weak. "Thank you, Inspector. It means so much to me." Miss Marple stood, tucking her knitting into her bag. "I'll be off then," she said. "But do let me know if I can help, Mrs. Harrison. I'm only a phone call away." Clara's eyes met hers, and for a moment Miss Marple saw something fear, maybe, or guilt. "Thank you, Miss Marple," Clara said, her voice barely above. A whisper, Miss Marple made her way out, passing Lily in the hall. The girl looked miserable, her eyes red from crying. "They think I did it," Lily whispered. "But I didn't, Miss Marple, I swear." "I believe you," Miss Marple said, patting her hand. "Don't worry, dear. Things have a way of sorting themselves out." Lily managed a small smile, and Miss Marple stepped into the cloudy afternoon. The manor's gates clanged shut behind her, and she started down the lane, her stick tapping the ground. The village was quieter now, the morning's excitement settling into whispers. She passed Mrs. Bantry's house and saw her friend in the garden, waving her over. "Jane," Mrs. Bantry called. "I heard about the brooch. What's going on up there?" Miss Marple joined her, settling onto a garden bench. "It's a puzzle, Dolly," she said, using Mrs. Bantry's first name. "A sapphire brooch stolen from a locked box, or maybe not so locked. The Harrisons are upset, but there's more to it than they're saying." Mrs. Bantry's eyes lit up. "I knew it. The Clara's hiding something, isn't she? And what about that Dr. Langley? He's too smooth, like a snake." Miss Marple's needles came out again, clicking softly. "People often hide things," she said. "But they can't hide everything. Not from a village like this." Mrs. Bantry leaned closer. "You heard something, didn't you? At the party, I mean. You were off by the roses, looking all innocent. But I know you, Jane. You were listening." Miss Marple's smile was small, but her eyes twinkled. "I might have heard a word or two. Mr. Harrison and Dr. Langley were talking near the library. They were worried about someone finding something out, and they mentioned Edward." Mrs. Bantry gasped. "The boy. What's he got to do with it?" "I don't know yet," Miss Marple said, "but I will. Puzzles always start with the edges, Dolly. You find the corners, and the rest falls into place." They talked a little longer, Mrs. Bantry full of theories about jewel thieves and secret lovers. Miss Marple listened, nodding, but her mind was back at the manor. She thought about Clara's tears, Langley's calm, Edward's silence. She thought about the argument she'd overheard, about no one's looking anymore. And she thought about Willow Manor, with its dark history of fire and a girl who vanished as she walked home. The clouds finally broke, and a light rain began to fall. Miss Marple pulled her shawl closer, her mind busy. The brooch was just the start, she was sure. It was a thread, a bright, shiny thread in a much bigger tapestry. And somewhere in that tapestry was the truth about the Harrisons, about Dr. Langley, about Willow Manor itself. Back in her cottage, she lit the fire and made a pot of tea, the familiar routine calming her thoughts. She settled into her chair, her knitting in her lap, and let the puzzle pieces settle. The brooch, the party, the argument, the manor's past, they were all connected. She could feel it. And she'd find the connection, stitch by stitch, just like she always did. The rain pattered against the windows, and St. Mary Mead was quiet, but Miss Marple's mind was alive, turning over the clues. The missing heirloom was more than a theft. It was a door, and she was ready to open it. Chapter 4. A curious photograph. The rain that had started the day before lingered over St. Mary Mead, turning the lanes to mud and keeping most folks indoors. But Miss Jane Marple wasn't one to let a little drizzle stop her. She stood at her cottage window, her knitting needles quiet for once, watching the grey sky and thinking about Willow Manor. The stolen sapphire brooch was the talk of the village, with everyone from Mrs. Weatherby to Tom Baker spinning tales about who might have taken it. Some blamed Lily, the young housemaid. Others whispered about a stranger at the garden party. But Miss Marple's mind was on the Harrisons' Clara's tearful eyes, Mr. Harrison's sharp temper, Edward's sullen silence, and Dr. Langley's too calm smile. There was a puzzle here, and the brooch was only one piece of it. She'd promised Clara Harrison she'd stop by the manor again to offer comfort after the theft. It was a good excuse to look around, to listen and watch in that quiet way of hers. So she put on her sturdy raincoat, a plain brown one that kept her dry without drawing attention, and tucked her knitting into a waterproof bag. Her grey hat, with its little feather, went on last, and she picked up her walking stick, more for show than need. The village always saw her as a sweet old lady, and Miss Marple was happy to let them. It made people talk more, and she was very good at listening. The walk to Willow Manor was slow, the mud sticking to her boots, but Miss Marple didn't mind. The rain made everything quiet, and quiet was good for thinking. She thought about the argument she'd overheard at the garden party, Mr. Harrison and Dr. Langley, whispering about secrets and danger. "No one's looking anymore," Langley had said, and Mr. Harrison had mentioned her, the old woman with the knitting. That had made her smile, but it also made her curious. What were they afraid she'd see? And what did Edward, their silent son, have to do with it? The manor's gates loomed ahead, wet and gleaming under the rain. The gravel drive was puddled, but the roses along the fence still looked bright, their petals heavy with water. Miss Marple knocked at the big oak door, and Lily opened it, her round face pale and her apron twisted in her hands. "Oh, Miss Marple," she said, her voice small. "It's kind of you to come. Mrs. Harrison's in the drawing-room, but she's not herself." Miss Marple patted Lily's arm. "Don't worry, dear. These things are upsetting, but they sort themselves out. Is Inspector Craddock here?" Lily shook her head. "He came earlier, but he's gone back to Much Benham. Said he'd be back tomorrow with his men to search the house." Miss Marple nodded, stepping into the hall. The manor was colder today, the dark wood panels seeming to soak up what little light came through the windows. She followed Lily to the drawing-room, where Clara Harrison sat on the same velvet sofa as yesterday, her blonde hair loose and her eyes red. Mr. Harrison stood by the window, staring out at the rain, his hands clasped behind his back. Dr. Langley was there too, sitting in an armchair with a book he wasn't reading, his glasses low on his nose. Edward was nowhere to be seen, which Miss Marple noted with interest. "Miss Marple," Clara said, standing with a weak smile, "you didn't have to come out in this weather, but it's so kind of you." "Nonsense," Miss Marple said, her voice warm. "I thought you might need a friendly face. Losing something precious is hard, and I know how a village can talk." Clara's smile faltered, and she sank back onto the sofa. "They're saying awful things, aren't they? That Lily took it, or even Edward. It's not true, Miss Marple. It can't be. Mr. Harrison turned from the window, his face hard. Of course it's not true. It's some outsider, some thief who saw a chance at the party. I told Craddock to check the guests, but he's wasting time poking around here. Miss Marple eyes were gentle, but they missed nothing. Mr. Harrison's anger was real, but there was something else in his system. His voice, a nervous edge to it. Maybe he's right to focus on the house. Someone familiar with it would know where to look. Dr. Langley glanced up from his book, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. That's a bold thing to say, Miss Marple. Are you suggesting one of us is a thief? Oh no, Miss Marple said, her tone mild. I only mean that Inspector Craddock is thorough. He'll look at every possibility. It's his job. Clara twisted her handkerchief. I just want my brooch back. It's all I have left of my grandmother. Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, settling into a chair and pulling out her knitting. The soft click of her needles filled the quiet room, and she let the conversation drift, listening as Clara spoke haltingly about the Brocher family heirloom, sapphire and gold, passed down for generations. But Miss Marple's mind was on the manor itself. The house felt heavy with history, and she couldn't shake the thought of the fire all those years ago, the girl who vanished. Evelyn Weston was it. The village still whispered about her, and Miss Marple wondered if the brooch's theft was tied to that old story somehow. Would you like some tea, Miss Marple? Clara asked, standing. I could use a cup myself. That would be lovely, Miss Marple said, and Clara rang a bell for Lily. As they waited, Miss Marple's eyes wandered to the walls, lined with old portraits and dusty bookshelves. The library was next door, she knew, a room she'd glimpsed. At the party, full of leather-bound books and shadows, she had a sudden urge to see it, to feel the weight of the manor's past. May I look at your library, Mrs. Harrison? She asked. I do love old books, and I hear Willow Manor has quite a collection. Clara hesitated, glancing at her husband. Oh, it's a bit of a mess, I'm afraid. We haven't had time to sort it out. Nonsense, Miss Marple said with a smile. I don't mind a bit of dust. If it's no trouble, I'd love a peek. Mr. Harrison frowned, but Dr. Langley spoke up, his voice smooth. Let her, Clara. It's just books. I'll show her the way. Miss Marple's heart gave a little jump. Langley's offer was unexpected, regular and quick, but she didn't argue. She followed him down the hall, her knitting bag over her arm, noting the way his eyes followed her. The library was a dim room, its tall windows letting in grey light. The shelves reached the ceiling, filled with books that smelled of age and leather. A big desk sat in the corner, covered with papers and a few cobwebs. What a wonderful room, Miss Marple said, running a finger along a shelf. So much history here. Langley leaned against the doorframe, watching her. History, yes. The Westons left quite a collection. Some of these books are centuries old. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes scanning the shelves. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she felt drawn to the room as if it held secrets. She pulled out a book at random, a heavy volume of poetry, and as she opened it, something slipped out and fluttered to the floor. She bent to pick it up, her fingers brushing against a yellowed photograph. Oh my, she said, holding it to the light. The photograph showed a young woman with dark hair, standing in front of Willow Manor, her arm linked with a man's. The date on the back read 1925, and the edges were singed, as if someone had tried to burn it. The woman looked strikingly like Clara Harrison, but the style of her dress was old, from another time. The man was tall, with sharp features, and something about his face seemed familiar, though Miss Marple couldn't place it. "What's that?" Langley asked, stepping closer. "Just a photograph," Miss Marple said, handing it to him. "It must have been tucked in the book." Langley's face tightened, just for a moment, before he smiled. "Old family pictures, probably. The Westons owned this place for generations." "Yes, probably," Miss Marple said, but her mind was racing. The woman in the photograph could be Clara's grandmother, given the resemblance, but the singed edges told a different story. Someone had wanted this picture gone. She slipped it back into the book, marking the spot in her memory. They returned to the drawing room, where Clara was pouring tea. The conversation turned to the party, the village, anything but the brooch. And Miss Marple let it flow, her needles clicking as she watched. Clara's hands shook as she poured. Mr. Harrison's jaw was tight, and Langley's calm was like a mask. Edward appeared briefly, grabbing a biscuit and vanishing again. His eyes avoiding everyone. As she left the manor, the rain had stopped, and the air smelled of wet earth. Miss Marple walked home slowly, the photograph in her mind, Evelyn Weston. She thought, the girl who vanished in the fire. The woman in the picture looked like her, or maybe Clara, but the date 1925 meant it couldn't be Clara. And the man, who was he? Not Mr. Weston, she was sure, but someone important. Someone tied to this house. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple lit a fire and sat with her tea, her knitting untouched. The photograph was the key. She felt it in her bones. It was hidden for a reason, and the singed edges whispered of secrets someone wanted buried. She thought of the Harrisons, their nervous glances, and Langley's cool eyes. The brooch was a distraction, a shiny thread, but the photograph was the heart of the puzzle. She sipped her tea, the fire crackling, and let her thoughts settle. The manor's past was waking up, and Miss Marple was ready to listen. Chapter 5. The village gossip. The rain had cleared by the afternoon, leaving St. Mary Mead sparkling under a pale sun. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage, her knitting needles clicking softly as she worked on her blue scarf. The fire crackled. In the hearth, and a pot of tea steamed on the table, filling the room with the faint scent of bergamot. But her mind wasn't on the tea or the scarf. It was on Willow Manor, on the photograph she'd found in the library, and on the Harrisons, whose secrets seemed to grow thicker with every passing day. The stolen sapphire brooch was the talk of the village, but that photography load, singed, and tucked away in a dusty book was the real puzzle. Miss Marple was sure. It held a story, one that connected the past to the present, and she meant to unravel it. She'd barely settled into her chair when there was a knock at the door. It was Mrs. Dolly Bantry, her best friend, bustling in with a basket of apples from her garden and a face full of excitement. "Jane," she said, plopping into a chair without waiting for an invitation, "you've been to the manor again, haven't you? I can tell by that look in your eye. What's going on up there? The whole village is buzzing about that brooch." Miss Marple smiled, pouring a cup of tea for her friend. "You do love a good story, Dolly." "Yes, I was at Willow Manor this morning. Poor Mrs. Harrison is quite upset about her brooch. Inspector Craddock is looking into it, of course." Mrs. Bantry took the tea, her eyes gleaming. "Upset, my foot. I bet she's putting on a show. You know what I heard? Clara Harrison isn't what she seems. I was at the post office this morning, and Mrs. Weatherbeau, she's got a tongue on hers head. Clara was engaged to some fellow years ago, before she married Mr. Harrison. A handsome man, rich too, but he up and vanished." Poof, Gone, just like that. Nobody knows what happened to him. Miss Marple's needles paused, just for a moment, vanished. She said, her voice mild, "That's interesting. Did Mrs. Weatherby say anything else?" "Oh, you know her," Mrs. Bantry said, waving a hand. "She's got a story for every letter that comes through her hands." But she said Clara was heartbroken, or at least she acted like it. Moved to London after that, met Mr. Harrison, and married him quick as you please. Funny thing, though nobody knows where their money comes. From business, they say, but what kind? Importing, exporting, something vague. And that Dr. Langley, Mrs. Weatherby thinks he's no doctor at all. Probably a crook, living off their fortune. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning over Mrs. Bantry's words. Gossip was like a river full of mud and bits of gold, and she was good at sifting through it. Clara S. vanished. Fiançailles was a new piece of the puzzle, and it fit with what she'd seen at the manor, the nervous glances, the whispered argument, the photograph, with its singed edges. The woman in that picture, with her dark hair and striking resemblance to Clara, could be a relative, maybe the grandmother Clara said the brooch belonged to. But why was the photograph hidden, and why had someone tried to burn it? "Dolly," Miss Marple said, setting her cup down, "do you remember the fire at Willow Manor? Back in the 1920s, when the Westons lived there." Mrs. Bantry's eyebrows shot up. "The fire, oh yes, I was just a girl then, but it was a big scandal. Evelyn Weston, that poor girl, vanished the night it happened. Some said she died in the flames, others that she ran off with a lover. The house was half-ruined, and the Westons left soon after." "Why do you ask?" Miss Marple's needles clicked again, steady and calm. "Just thinking," she said. "Old houses have long memories, don't they? And Willow Manor, while it feels like it's trying to tell us something." Mrs. Bantry leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You think the brooch has something to do with that fire, don't you? Oh, Jane, you're onto something, I can tell. What did you see at the manor today?" Miss Marple's smile was small, but her eyes twinkled. "Not much, Dolly, just a big old house with too many shadows. But I did find a photograph in the library, tucked inside a book. A young woman standing in front of the manor with a man. The date was 1925, and the edges were singed, like someone tried to burn it." Mrs. Bantry gasped, nearly spilling her tea. "Singed, oh, that's suspicious. Who was the woman? Did she look like Clara?" "A little," Miss Marple said. "Enough to make me wonder. The man, though I didn't recognize him, but he looked important. Not a servant, not a villager, someone who belonged at the manor." Mrs. Bantry's eyes were wide. "You think it's Evelyn Weston, don't you? And the fire, maybe someone wanted that photograph gone because it showed something they didn't want seen. Jane, you're brilliant. You should tell Inspector Craddock." Miss Marple shook her head, her needles moving faster. "Not yet, Dolly. It's just a photograph, after all. It might mean nothing, but I'll keep it in mind." She wouldn't tell Craddock, not yet. He was a good policeman, but he liked facts, fingerprints, alibis, things he could write in his notebook. Miss Marple worked with softer things, a nervous glance, a whispered word, a picture hidden where it wasn't meant to be found. She thought about the library, the dusty shelves, the way Dr. Langley's face had tightened when she showed him the photograph. He'd called it an old family picture, but his eyes had said something else. Fear, maybe, or calculation. Mrs. Bantry stayed for another hour, her stories tumbling out like apples from her basket. She talked about the Harrisons' fancy car, Edward's sullen mood, and Dr. Langley's odd habit of wandering the village at night. Miss Marple listened, nodding, letting the gossip settle in her mind. Some of it was nonsense, but some of it was gold. Clara's vanished fiancé, for instance, that was worth thinking about. Had he really disappeared, or was he part of the manor's secrets? And the photograph, with its singed edges, a 1925 date, could it be Evelyn Weston, or someone connected to her? After Mrs. Bantry left, promising to dig up more gossip, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting in her lap. The photograph was the key, she was sure. It wasn't just a picture, it was a clue, a thread that tied the brooch's theft to the manor's past. She thought about Clara, so young and nervous, and Mr. Harrison, with his angry voice and worried eyes. She thought about Edward, slipping away from the drawing room, and Dr. Langley, watching her like a hawk. And she thought about the fire, the night Evelyn Weston vanished, leaving whispers that still lingered in St. Mary Mead. She stood and moved to her writing desk, pulling out a small notebook. She didn't write much, just a few words. Photograph. 1925. Evelyn. Clara's fiancé Langley. It was enough to keep her thoughts straight, like markers in her knitting. She closed the notebook and went to the window, looking out at the village. The sun was setting, painting the cottages gold, but Willow Manor stood dark against the horizon, its chimneys sharp against the sky. Miss Marple's mind turned to the next day. She'd visit Mr. Gibbs, the manor's caretaker, who'd mentioned Edward poking around the library. He'd worked there before the fire, and he might know something about Evelyn Weston, or the photograph, or the man who stood beside her. Old people, she knew, remembered things others forgot, and Mr. Gibbs had a sharp mind under his wrinkled face. She made herself a simple supper soup and bread from Tom Tilder. System, baker's shop, even if it was a bit burnt, and sat by the fire, her knitting back in her hands. The scarf was growing, stitch by stitch, just like the mystery. The photograph was the heart of it, she felt sure, but it wasn't the only piece. The brooch, the argument, Clara's vanished fiancé, the fire, all were threads in the same tapestry, and Miss Marple was good at weaving threads together as the fire died down. She thought about the village, so quiet on the surface, but alive with secrets underneath. St. Mary Mead was like her garden, full of hidden things waiting to be uncovered. She'd found the photograph, a small bloom in the dirt, but there was more to dig up. The Harrisons were hiding something, and Dr. Langley was part of it. Edward too, with his silent ways and angry eyes. And Willow Manor itself, with its dusty library and singed secrets, was whispering to her, telling her to look closer. Miss Marple set her knitting aside and turned off the lamp, the room falling into soft darkness. The village was asleep, but her mind was awake, turning over the clues like stones in a stream. Tomorrow she'd talk to Mr. Gibbs, and maybe visit the vicarage, where old records might mention the Westons. She'd watch and listen, as she always did, letting the puzzle pieces fall into place. The clock on the mantel chimed, and Miss Marple smiled to herself. The photograph was a door, and she was ready to step through it. The mystery of Willow Manor was growing, and Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and quiet ways, was just the person to solve it. Chapter 6. Edward's secret. The evening air in St. Mary Mead was cool and damp, with a hint of mist curling around the cottages like a soft blanket. Miss Jane Marple stood at her cottage window, her knitting needles quiet for once, watching the village settle into dusk. The day had been full of whispers about the stolen sapphire brooch at Willow Manor, and her mind was busy with the puzzle it presented. The photograph she'd found in the manor's library, a young woman resembling Clara Harrison, standing with a man in 1925, its edges singed, had stayed with her, like a knot in her yarn that needed untangling. Clara's nervous tears, Mr. Harrison's sharp temper, Dr. Langley's cool smile, and Edward's sullen silence all pointed to secrets, and Miss Marple was determined to find out what they were. She'd planned to visit Mr. Gibbs, the manor's caretaker, tomorrow to ask about the old fire and Evelyn Weston, the girl who vanished. But tonight, something else caught her attention. From her window, she saw a figure slip out of Willow Manor's gates, moving quickly down the lane. It was Edward Harrison, his tall frame hunched, his fair hair catching the last light. He looked like he didn't want to be seen, and that was enough to make Miss Marple curious. In St. Mary Mead, people who moved like that usually had something to hide. She set her knitting down and reached for her coat, a sturdy brown one that blended into the shadows. Her grey hat went on, the little feather tucked low, and she grabbed her walking stick, more for appearances than need. The village thought of her as a harmless old lady, and she liked it that wit let her watch without being watched. She slipped out the door, her steps light but steady, and followed Edward at a distance, keeping to the edges of the lane where the hedges gave her cover. The village was quiet, most folks inside having supper or sitting by their fires. Edward moved fast, his hands in his pockets, his head down. He didn't go toward the main street, where the post office and bakery glowed with light, but toward the churchyard, a shadowy place at the edge of St. Mary Mead, the old stone church, with its square tower and weathered graves, was peaceful in the daytime, but at night it felt different, full of whispers from the past. Miss Marple's heart beat a little faster, not from fear but from excitement. She loved moments like this. When the puzzle started to show its shape, she stayed behind a row of yew trees, their branches heavy with mist, and watched as Edward paused by the church gate. He glanced around, his eyes darting, then pushed the gate open and slipped inside. Miss Marple waited a moment, then followed, her stick silent on the grass. The churchyard was a maze of headstones, some so old the names were worn away. She moved carefully, keeping Edward in sight, her small figure hidden in the shadows. Edward stopped near a tall gravestone, its cross leaning slightly, and looked round again. Miss Marple crouched behind a bush, her knees protesting, but her mind sharp. She saw another figure step out from behind the churchman, older, with glasses that glinted in the dim light. Dr. Langley, her breath caught. She'd suspected Langley was more than he seemed, with his smooth voice and watchful eyes, but seeing him here, meeting Edward in secret, confirmed it. They were up to something, and it wasn't good. She strained to hear, her ears as sharp as her needles. The men spoke in low voices, their words muffled by the mist but clear enough to catch. "You've got to stop poking around," Edward Langley said, his tone sharp but quiet. "You're going to ruin everything." "I'm not." "Stupid," Edward snapped, his voice low and angry. "I know what's going on. You think I don't see how she looks at you. The truth about hurts in that house, isn't it?" Langley's voice stayed calm, but there was an edge to it. "You don't know anything, boy. Keep your nose out of it, or you'll regret it. Your father's already on edge, and your mother, she's not as strong as you think." Edward's hands clenched into fists. "Don't talk about her like that." If I find it, you'll what? Langley cut in, stepping closer. Tell the police. That old woman who's always sniffing around. You think they'll believe you? Miss Marple's lips twitched into a smile. So they were talking. About her again, the old woman with her knitting. She didn't mind. It meant she was getting close enough to make them nervous. But who was her? Clara, most likely, given Edward's anger, but it could be someone else, someone tied to the photograph or the fire. She wished she could see their faces better, but the mist and the shadows hid them. Edward turned away, his shoulders stiff. I'm not afraid of you, he said, but his voice shook. I'll find it, and then we'll see. Langley grabbed his arm, his voice dropping to a hiss. Don't be a fool. You don't know what you're dealing with. Stay out of the library and keep your mouth shut. Edward yanked his arm free and stormed off, disappearing through the church gate. Langley stood for a moment, his head bowed, then turned and walked back toward the manor, his steps slow and deliberate. Miss Marple waited until he was gone, then stood, brushing the damp grass from her coat. Her mind was buzzing like the bees. In her garden, Edward was looking for something in the library, maybe the same photograph she'd found, or something else, something that made Langley nervous, and the truth about her. That was the heart of it, she was sure. She made her way home, careful to avoid the lane where Edward might see her. The village was dark now, the cottages glowing with lamplight, and she slipped into her cottage unnoticed. The fire had gone out, but she didn't bother relighting it. She made a pot of tea and sat in her armchair, her knitting untouched, her thoughts on the churchyard, Edward's anger, Langley's warning, the mention of the library, it all pointed to Willow Manor, two secrets hidden in its dusty rooms. She thought about the photograph again, the woman who looked like Clara, the man who might be connected to the fire. Evelyn Weston, the girl who vanished in 1925, was part of this. She felt it in her bones. And Clara S., vanished fiancé, for the one Mrs. Bantry had mentioned, could he be the man in the picture? Or was he someone else, someone tied to Langley? Ms. Marple sipped her tea, the steam curling in the dim light. The brooch was a distraction, a shiny bauble to keep people looking the wrong way. The real mystery was deeper, older, rooted in the manor's past. She thought about Edward, so young and angry, and Langley, so calm and dangerous. They were hiding something, and Edward was closer to it than he knew. The truth about her, he'd said. Clara or Evelyn or someone else entirely. And what was in the library that Langley didn't want found? She stood and went to her writing desk, pulling out her little notebook. She added a few words. Edward, churchyard, Langley, library, truth about her. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep the puzzle clear. She closed the notebook and looked out the window, where the village slept under the misty sky. Tomorrow she'd talk to Mr. Gibbs, the caretaker, and maybe poke around the vicarage for old records about the Westons. The library was the key, she was sure, and she'd find a way to look again. To see what Edward was searching for. The clock chimed, and Miss Marple smiled. The puzzle was growing, its pieces scattered, but starting to fit. The photograph, the brooch, the fire, the secrets, they were all threads in the same tapestry, and she was ready to weave them together. Chapter 7. The caretaker's tale. The morning sun broke through the mist over St. Mary Mead, casting a soft glow on the cottages and turning the wet cobblestones into a patchwork of light. Miss Jane Marple was up early, as usual, tending to her. Roses before the village stirred. Her garden was a tidy haven, with neat rows of flowers and a small bench where she often sat to think. Today, though her thoughts were on Willow Manor, the stolen sapphire brooch, and the singed photograph she'd found in the library, the image of a young woman, so like Clara Harrison, standing with a man in 1925, lingered in her mind, as did the heated words she'd overheard in the churchyard between Edward Harrison and Dr. Langley. The truth about her, Edward had said, and Langley had warned him to stay out of the library. Miss Marple's knitting needles might be still, but her mind was busy, picking at the puzzle like a loose thread in her scarf. She'd decided to visit Mr. Gibbs, the manor's caretaker, who'd worked there since before the fire of 1925. He'd mentioned Edward poking around the library, and Miss Marple was sure he knew more about the manor's secrets than most. Old people, she knew, held stories like treasures, and Mr. Gibbs, with his wrinkled face and sharp eyes, was no exception. She put on a simple grey dress, her usual hat with its little feather, and tucked her knitting into a bag. Her walking stick tapped lightly as she set out, more for show than need, keeping up her image as the village's harmless old lady. People talked freely around someone like that, and Miss Marple was counting on it. The lane to Willow Manor was quiet, the air fresh with the smell of damp earth and roses. The village was just waking, with Tom Baker sweeping his shop steps and Mrs. Weatherby peering from the post office window. Miss Marple nodded to them, her smile polite, but her mind was on the manor. The brooch, the photograph, Edward's secret. Meeting with Langley, they were pieces of a puzzle, and she was starting to see its shape. The fire, the one that took Evelyn Weston all those years ago, was at the heart of it, she felt sure, and Mr. Gibbs might hold the key to unlocking it. She found him in the manor's garden, near the old stables, pruning a hedge with slow, careful snips. Mr. Gibbs was small and wiry, his face like a crumpled apple, but his hands were steady, and his eyes were sharp when he looked up. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, setting his shears down. "Didn't expect to see you out here. Come about that brooch, have you?" Miss Marple smiled, settling onto a nearby bench. "You hear everything, don't you, Mr. Gibbs?" "I suppose the village is full of talk," he chuckled, wiping his hands on his apron. "Aye, they never stop. Blaming that poor housemaid, Lily, or some stranger from the party. But you're not here for gossip, are you? You've got that look, like you're after something." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "I'm just an old lady who likes a chat, Mr. Gibbs. But I did wonder about Willow Manor. It's such an old house, full of stories. You've been here a long time, haven't you?" "Since I was a lad," he said, leaning on his shears. "Started as a gardener's boy, back when the Westons owned the place. That was before the fire, of course. 1925, that was changed everything." Miss Marple nodded, pulling out her knitting. The soft click of her needles filled the air, a comforting sound that made people relax, and she wanted Mr. Gibbs relaxed. "The fire," she said, her voice gentle. "I was young then, but I remember the talk. Evelyn Weston, wasn't it? The girl who disappeared." Mr. Gibbs's face darkened, and he glanced at the manor, its tall chimneys looming against the sky. "Aye, Evelyn. Pretty thing, full of life, with dark hair and a laugh you could hear across the garden. She was the Weston's daughter, only 20 or so. Everyone loved her, or thought they did. Then the fire came, and she was gone. Some said she died in it. Others, that she ran off. Never found her, though not a trace." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. "How sad," she said. "Was it an accident, the fire?" Mr. Gibbs hesitated, his eyes narrowing. That's what they said. Started in the library, they thought, maybe a candle left burning. But I was there that night, helping put it out. The flames were fierce, but they didn't spread far, just the library and part of the hall. Looked to me like someone wanted that room gone. Miss Marple's heart gave a little jump, but her face stayed calm. Wanted it gone, she said. That's a strong thing to say, Mr. Gibbs. He shrugged, picking up his shears again. I was young, but I wasn't stupid. The Westons were a rich family, but they had troubles. Money disputes, inheritance fights. Evelyn was set to get the manor, you see, but there were others who wanted it. After the fire, the family left, and the house stood empty for years. Never felt right to me. Miss Marple's mind raced. The library, where she'd found the photograph, was the heart of the fire. Now Edward was poking around there, looking for something that made Dr. Langley nervous. She thought of the singed photograph, the woman who looked like Clara, the man beside her. Could it be Evelyn Weston? And if so, why was it hidden? Did you ever hear of a photograph, Mr. Gibbs? She asked, her voice soft. One from around that time, maybe of Evelyn with someone? He frowned, scratching his chin. Can't say I did. The Westons had plenty of pictures, but most went up in the fire. If there's one left, it'd be in the library, I reckon. There's a hidden room there, you know, behind the big bookshelf. Used to be a priest hole from the old days. The Westons kept papers in it, important ones. If anything survived, it'd be there. Miss Marple's needles paused, just for a second. A hidden room, that was new, and it made her heart beat faster. A hidden room, she said, as if it were no more than a curious fact. How interesting. I suppose no one's looked in it for years. Not since the fire, Mr. Gibbs said. The Harrisons don't even know it's there, far as I can tell. But that boy, Edward, he's been in the library a lot. Seen him myself, pulling books off shelves, like he's hunting for something. Makes me wonder what he's after. Miss Marple nodded, her mind spinning. Edward in the library, Langley warning him to stay out. A hidden room, no one knew about it, all fit, like stitches in a pattern. She thought of the photograph again, its singed edges whispering of secrets, someone. Wanted, buried. Was Edward looking for it, or something else? And was it tied to the brooch, or to Clara's vanished fiancés, or to the fire that took Evelyn Weston? Thank you, Mr. Gibbs, she said, tucking her knitting away. You've been very kind. To chat with an old lady like me. I'd better get home before the rain comes back. He chuckled, tipping his cap. Mind how you go, Miss Marple, and watch yourself. That manor's got shadows, and not all of Mr. Friendly. She smiled, but his words stayed with her as she walked down the lane. The manor did have shadows, and they were growing longer. She thought of Clara's nervous hands, Mr. Harrison's angry voice, Langley's cold eyes, and Edward's secret. Meeting in the churchyard, the truth about her, he'd said. And now Mr. Gibbs had given her a new piece, a hidden room in the library, a place where secrets might still be kept. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple lit the fire and made a pot of tea, the familiar routine calming her busy mind. She sat in her armchair, her knitting in her lap, and let the puzzle pieces settle. The photograph was the heart of it, she was sure, but the hidden room was a new thread, one that could lead to answers. She thought of Evelyn Weston, the girl who vanished, and the man in the photograph who might be tied to her disappearance. Was he Clara's fiancé, the one who vanished too, or was he someone else, someone connected to Langley? She opened her little notebook and added a few words. Hidden room, library, Evelyn. Edward's search. It was enough to keep her thoughts straight, like markers in her knitting. Tomorrow, she'd find a way to get back to the manor, to look at that library again. Maybe she'd ask Inspector Craddock to let her help, saying she wanted to tidy the books or some such nonsense. He'd laugh, but he'd let her, because he knew she saw things he missed. The village was quiet now, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows across the lane. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes on the fire. The brooch was a shiny distraction, but the photograph and the hidden room were the real mystery. They were tied to the fire, to Evelyn Weston, to the Harrisons' secrets, and Miss Marple, with her sharp eyes and quiet ways, was ready to find the truth, stitch by stitch. Chapter 8. A second theft. The sun was high over St. Mary Mead, its light filtering through the trees and casting dappled shadows on the village lanes. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage, her knitting needles clicking softly as she worked on her blue scarf, but her mind was far from the yarn in her hands. The puzzle of Willow Manor was growing, its pieces multiplying like stitches in a pattern. The stolen sapphire brooch, the singed photograph from 1925, Edward's secret meeting with Dr. Langley in the churchyard, and Mr. Gibbs's tale of a hidden room in the library all pointed to secrets buried in the manor's past. Miss Marple was sure the fire that took Evelyn Weston in 1925 was at the heart of it, and the photograph, with its mysterious woman and man, was the key to unlocking it. She was just finishing a cup of tea when a sharp knock at the door broke. Her thoughts, it was Mrs. Weatherby, the postmistress, her face flushed with excitement and her scarf askew. "Miss Marple," she gasped, barely through the door. "You won't believe if there's been another theft at Willow Manor. A silver locket, gone this morning, right from Mrs. Harrison's bedroom." Miss Marple's needles paused, her blue eyes sharp under her grey hat. "Another theft," she said, her voice calm but curious. "That's very troubling. What do they say about it?" Mrs. Weatherby plopped into a chair, fanning herself with her hand. "Oh, it's a mess, Clara. Harrison's in a state, crying and carrying on. She's blaming Lily, the housemaid. Says she's the only one who could have done it. Mr. Harrison's furious, and they've sacked Lily on the spot. Poor girl's packing her things now. Inspector Craddock's been called again, but he's not there yet. The village is buzzing. Miss Marple to thefts in a week." Miss Marple nodded, pouring a cup of tea for Mrs. Weatherby. "Poor Lily," she said. "It must be hard for her, being accused like that. Did anyone see anything?" "Not a thing," Mrs. Weatherby said, taking the tea with a grateful nod. "But Clara swears Lily was in her room yesterday, cleaning, and the locket was there. Then, it's a family heirloom, like the brooch, with a little picture inside. Clara says it's worth a fortune, but I think she's more upset about the picture than the locket itself." Miss Marple's mind turned over the news. Another theft. So soon after the brooch, and Clara pointing the finger at Lily. It was too neat, too quick, like a stitch pulled too tight. She thought of Lily's pale face, her nervous hands, and the way she'd sworn she hadn't taken the brooch, and she thought of Clara, with her teary eyes and nervous glances, and Dr. Langley, whose calm smile hid something sharp. "Thank you, Mrs. Weatherby," she said. "I think I'll go up to the manor, see if I can offer any comfort. These things are so upsetting." Mrs. Weatherby's eyes gleamed. "You will, won't you? And you'll notice something, I bet." "You always do, Miss Marple." Miss Marple smiled, tucking her knitting into her bag. She put on her sturdy brown coat and her grey hat, the little feather bobbing as she stepped out into the sunshine. The lane to Willow Manor was busy with villagers, all whispering about the new theft. She nodded to Tom Baker, who was sweeping his shop steps, and waved to the vicar, who was hurrying toward the church. The manor's gates were open, and a small crowd had gathered outside, craning their necks to see what was happening inside. The manor was in chaos. Clara Harrison sat in the drawing room, her face buried in a handkerchief, while Mr. Harrison paced by the fireplace, his voice sharp with anger. Dr. Langley lounged in an armchair, his glasses glinting as he watched the scene, and Edward stood by the window, his hands in his pockets, his face dark. Inspector Craddock hadn't arrived yet, but Lily was there, standing in the corner with a small suitcase, her eyes red and her apron crumpled. "Miss Marple," Clara said, looking up with a weak smile, "you're so kind to come. It's awful, another theft. My silver locket, gone, just like the brooch. I can't bear it." Miss Marple patted her arm, her voice gentle. There, Mrs. Harrison. It's a terrible thing, losing something so precious. But I'm sure Inspector Craddock will sort it out." Mr. Harrison stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. "He'd better. This is getting ridiculous. 2 thefts in a week, and now they're saying it's our own staff. That girl," he pointed at Lily, who flinched. "She was in Clara's room yesterday. Who else could it be?" Lily's voice was small but firm. "I didn't take it. Sir, I swear I didn't. I was just cleaning, like always." Clara's eyes flashed. "You were the only one in there, Lily. The locket was on my dresser last night, and now it's gone. What am I supposed to think?" Miss Marple's knitting came out, the needles clicking softly as she settled into a chair. She watched the room, her eyes missing nothing. Clara's tears were real, but there was a hardness in her voice when she spoke to Lily, like she was trying to convince herself as much as anyone else. Mr. Harrison's anger was loud, but his hands shook slightly, betraying worry. Dr. Langley was too calm, his fingers tapping the arm of his chair, and Edward looked like he wanted to disappear, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her voice mild, "it's too soon to point fingers. A big house like this, with so many people coming and going. Anyone could have slipped in." Clara's head snapped up. "You think so? But the room was locked. I'm sure of it." "Locked, like the jewelry box?" Miss Marple asked, her tone innocent. Clara hesitated, her handkerchief twisting in her hands. "Well, I think so. It's been so busy, I might have forgotten." Dr. Langley leaned forward, his voice smooth. "It's an old house. Miss Marple locks are finicky. And with the party, the servants running about, it's no wonder things go missing." Miss Marple nodded, but her mind was racing. Langley was quick to explain, just like he'd been about the brooch. And Clara's hesitation about the locket was the same story as before. Too vague, too convenient. She thought of the photograph, hidden in the library, and Mr. Gibbs's talk of a hidden room. Was the locket's theft another distraction, meant to keep people from looking deeper? She turned to Lily, who was clutching her suitcase like a lifeline. "Lily dear," she said, "would you mind helping me with my coat? I'm feeling a bit warm." Lily looked surprised but nodded, following Miss Marple to the hall. Once they were alone, Miss Marple's voice softened. "You poor thing, this must be so hard for you. Tell me, did you see anything odd in Mrs. Harrison's room yesterday? Anything at all?" Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she straightened up. "I didn't take anything, Miss Marple, I swear." But there was something strange. When I was cleaning, I saw Mrs. Harrison by the fireplace, burning some papers. She didn't know I was there. Y was behind the curtains, fixing a snag. One of the papers fell, and it had a drawing on it like a map or a plan. She grabbed it quick and threw it in the fire when she saw me. Miss Marple's heart gave a little jump. "A map," she said, keeping her voice calm. "How interesting. Did you see what it showed?" Lily shook her head. "Not really. It was just lines and shapes, like a floor plan, maybe." But she looked scared, Miss Marple, like she didn't want anyone to see it. Miss Marple patted her hand. "You're a good girl, Lily. Don't worry. I'm sure this will all come right." Lily managed a small smile, and Miss Marple returned to the drawing room, her mind buzzing. A map burned in a hurry. It could be nothing, just household papers, but Clara's fear made it something more. Was it tied to the hidden room Mr. Gibbs had mentioned, or to the photograph with its singed edges and secrets from 1925? Inspector Craddock arrived soon after, his notebook out and his face serious. He questioned Clara, Mr. Harrison, and the other servants, but Miss Marple noticed how little they said. Clara stuck to her story about Lily. Mr. Harrison ranted about village thieves, and Dr. Langley offered smooth explanations that didn't quite add up. Edward stayed silent, slipping out of the room when Craddock wasn't looking. Miss Marple stayed as long as she could, her knitting a quiet presence in the tense room. When she finally left, the sun was dipping low, and the manor's shadows stretched long across the lawn. She walked home slowly, her stick tapping the path, her thoughts on Lily's words. A map burned in secret, a locket stolen so soon after, the brooch and the photograph hidden in the library where Edward was searching and Langley didn't want him to look. Back in her cottage, she lit the fire and made a pot of tea, settling into her armchair with her knitting. She opened her notebook and added a few words. Locket, Lily, burned map, hidden room. The puzzle was growing, its pieces fitting together, but the picture was still blurry. She thought of Evelyn Weston, the girl who vanished in the fire, and the woman in the photograph who looked so like Clara. Was the map a plan of the manor, showing the hidden room? And was the locket another clue, or just another distraction? The village was quiet now, the cottages glowing with lamplight. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her needles clicking softly. Tomorrow, she'd find a way to get back to the library, to look for that hidden room. She'd talk to Craddock, maybe, and see if he'd let her poke around. The manor was full of secrets, and she was close to one. She could feel it. The photograph, the map, the thefts, they were all threads in the same tapestry, and Miss Marple was ready to weave them together. Chapter 9. The hidden room. The morning sun peeked through the curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting soft patterns on the floor where her knitting lay, untouched for once. St. Mary Mead was waking slowly, the air crisp with the promise of a clear day, but Miss Marple's mind was already at Willow Manor. The puzzle of the stolen sapphire brooch and silver locket was growing. Tangled with the singed photograph from 1925, Edward's secretive meeting with Dr. Langley, and Mr. Gibbs's tale of a hidden room in the library. Lily's story about Clara burning a map-like paper had only tightened the knot, and Miss Marple was sure the manor held the key to unraveling it. Today, she'd find a way to explore that library again, to look for the hidden room Mr. Gibbs had mentioned and see what secrets it held. She dressed in her simple grey frock, pinned on her grey hat with its little feather, and tucked her knitting into a bag. Her walking stick tapped lightly as she stepped out, keeping up her image as the village's harmless old lady. People let their guard down around someone like that, and Miss Marple needed every advantage. The lane to Willow Manor was quiet, the village still buzzing about the second theft. Mrs. Weatherby had spread the news of Lily's dismissal, and the poor girl was the talk of every shop and garden. Miss Marple felt for her. She was sure Lily was innocent, but she also knew the accusation was a clue, a thread pointing to something bigger at the manor's gates. She paused to admire the roses, their petals bright despite the recent rain. The big oak door was opened by the cook, Mrs. Price, who looked flustered. "Miss Marple," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's a madhouse here. Mrs. Harrison's still crying about that locket, and Mr. Harrison's shouting at everyone. Inspector Craddock's in the drawing room, asking questions again." Miss Marple smiled kindly. "I thought I'd offer my sympathies, and perhaps I could help tidy the library. It's such a lovely room, but so dusty. I do love old books." Mrs. Price raised an eyebrow but nodded. "You're welcome to try, but they're all on edge. Mind how you go." In the drawing room, Clara Harrison sat on the velvet sofa, her face pale and her hands twisting a handkerchief. Mr. Harrison stood by the fireplace, his arms crossed, his face red with anger. Dr. Langley was in his usual armchair, his glasses glinting as he watched the room, and Edward slouched by the window, his eyes on the floor. Inspector Craddock stood with his notebook, looking tired but determined. "Miss Marple," Craddock said, a small smile breaking through. "Come to poke around, have you?" "Oh, Inspector," she said, her voice mild, "I'm just here to offer comfort. But I did wonder if I could look at the library. Old books are a hobby of mine, and it might take Mrs. Harrison's mind off things to have them tidied." Clara looked up, her eyes red. "The library, it's a mess, Miss Marple. But if you want to, I suppose it's all right." Mr. Harrison frowned. "What's the point of fussing with books? We've got a thief to catch." Craddock raised a hand. "Let her, Mr. Harrison. Miss Marple has a knack for noticing things. If there's anything in that library that could help, she'll find it." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, but she kept her face innocent. "Thank you, Inspector. I'll be careful." Dr. Langley's fingers tapped his chair, and Miss Marple caught the quick glance he shot at Mr. Harrison. They didn't want her in the library, she was sure, but they couldn't say so without looking suspicious. She followed Mrs. Price down the hall, her knitting bag over her arm, her heart beating a little faster. The library was dim, its tall windows letting in pale light that danced on the dusty shelves. The air smelled of old leather and paper, and Miss Marple felt a thrill, like stepping into a story. She started with the bookshelf near the desk, where she'd found the photograph. Her fingers brushed the spines, pulling out books at random, but her eyes were on the wall behind. Mr. Gibbs had said there was a hidden room, a priest hole from the old days, and she meant to find it. She worked slowly, humming to herself, her knitting out to keep her hands busy. The click of her needles was a comforting sound, one that made people think she was just a fussy old lady, not someone hunting for secrets. She was halfway through the shelf when she felt at a book that didn't move like the others. It was a heavy volume, bound in dark leather, and when she tugged it, there was a soft click. The bookshelf shuddered, then swung inward, revealing a narrow door set into the wall. Miss Marple's breath caught, but she kept her face calm, glancing over her shoulder to make sure no one was watching. The door was old, its wood warped, but it opened easily when she pushed, revealing a small, dark room. She stepped inside, her stick tapping the stone floor. The air was musty, and a single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a weak glow when she pulled its chain. The room was barely bigger than a closet, with shelves along one wall and a small table in the corner. On the table was a box, its lid carved with intricate designs, and inside were papers, letters, receipts, and a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed but intact. Miss Marple's heart raced as she opened the journal. The handwriting was neat, feminine, and dated 1925. Evelyn Weston, it read on the first page. She scanned the entries, her eyes catching phrases. Father's will. The manor is mine, but they won't let it go. He says he loves me, but I don't trust him. The papers are hidden where no one will find them. The last entry was dated the night of the fire. I know the truth now. If I don't act, they'll take everything. The room will keep it safe. She set the journal down and looked at the letters, tied with a faded ribbon. Most were from Evelyn to a man named Charles, full of love and worry. But one caught her Aja letter from Charles, dated just before the fire, promising to settle the matter and make sure the manor stays hers. Miss Marple's mind spun. Charles could be the man in the photograph, the one with sharp features standing beside Evelyn. Was he Clara's vanished fiancé, or someone else tied to the fire? She tucked the journal and a few letters into her bag, careful to leave the rest undisturbed. The hidden room was a treasure, but she couldn't stay long, someone might notice. She closed the door, pushed the bookshelf back, and returned to the library, her knitting in hand. She was just pulling out another book when Dr. Langley appeared in the doorway, his glasses glinting. "Find anything interesting, Miss Marple?" he asked, his voice smooth but sharp. "Oh, just dust and old poetry," she said, holding up a book with a smile. "This house is full of treasures, isn't it?" He watched her for a moment, his eyes narrow, then nodded. "It is, but some treasures are best left alone." Miss Marple's heart skipped, but she kept her smile. "I'm sure you're right, Dr. Langley. I'll leave the tiding to someone younger." She left the manor soon after, thanking Clara and promising to visit again. The walk home was slow, her stick tapping the path, her mind on the hidden room. The journal and letters were heavy in her bag, and she felt the weight of their secrets. Evelyn Weston had been fighting for her inheritance, and someone, Charles, perhaps had been part of it. The fire, the photograph, the thefts, they were all connected, she was sure, and the hidden room was the link. Back in her cottage, she lit the fire and made tea, settling into her armchair with the journal. She read it carefully, her needles clicking as she thought. Evelyn's words were full of fear and determination, and the mention of hidden papers made her think of the map Lily had seen Clara burn. Was it a plan of the manor, showing the hidden room? And were the thief's brooch and locket meant to distract from what was really at stake? She opened her notebook and added a few words. Hidden room, Evelyn's journal, Charles, inheritance. The puzzle was clearer now, but still incomplete. Tomorrow she'd talk to the vicar, who might have records about the Westons, and she'd watch the Harrisons more closely. Clara's tears, Edward's search, Langley's warnings, they were all threads, and Miss Marple was ready to weave them together. The village slept, its cottages dark under the starry sky. But Miss Marple's mind was awake, turning over the clues. The hidden room had given her a piece of the past, and she was closer to the truth than ever. Chapter 10. Dr. Langley's Past. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate shadows on the walls where her knitting lay neatly folded. St. Mary Mead was quiet, the village waking slowly, under a pale blue sky, but Miss Marple's mind was far from peaceful. The puzzle of Willow Manor was growing, its threads tangling around the stolen sapphire brooch, the silver locket, the singed photograph from 1925, and the hidden room in the library, the journal and letters she'd found there, written by Evelyn Weston, spoke of a disputed inheritance and a man named Charles, hinting at secrets tied to the fire that took her. In 1925, Edward's secret meeting with Dr. Langley in the churchyard, Lily's tale of Clara burning a map, and Mr. Gibbs's mention of a hidden room all pointed to a deeper mystery. And Miss Marple was sure Dr. Langley was at its heart. She'd decided to dig into Langley's past, and for that she needed help. Her nephew, Raymond West, a writer with a knack for finding information, was just the person. He was visiting St. Mary Mead for the weekend, staying at the vicarage with his wife, Joan, and Miss Marple had invited him for tea. She put on her favourite grey dress, pinned her hat with its little feather, and set out a tray of tea and biscuits. Her knitting bag sat by her chair, a comforting presence, though she doubted she'd need it today. Raymond was sharp, but he liked to talk, and she'd need to keep him focused. The knock at the door came promptly at 11, and Raymond swept in, his dark hair tousled and his smile wide. "Aunt Jane," he said, kissing her cheek. "You look as spry as ever." Joan sends her love she's helping the vicar with some charity event. "Now, what's this about a mystery?" Your note sounded positively cryptic. Miss Marple smiled, pouring tea into her best china cups. "You do love a story." Raymond: "I'm just an old lady with too much time to think. But there's something odd at Willow Manor. You've heard about the thefts, I'm sure." Raymond leaned back, his eyes gleaming. "The whole village is talking about it. A sapphire brooch, a silver locket, and poor Lily sacked for it. Sounds like one of my novels, Aunt Jane. What's got you curious?" She handed him a cup, her voice mild. "It's not just the thefts. There's a family up there, the Harrison's End, a man called Dr. Langley, who's staying with them. I'd like to know more about him. He's interesting, and I think you could find out what he's about." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "Interesting, eh? That's your way of saying suspicious." "All right, tell me more. What's this Dr. Langley done to catch your eye?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she pulled out her knitting, settling into her chair. "He's too calm, Raymond, in a house full of nerves. Clara Harrison cries over her stolen jewels, Mr. Harrison shouts, and their son, Edward, skulks about. But Langley just watches, like a cat at a mouse hole. I overheard him talking to Edward in the churchyard, warning him to stay out of the library. And I found something in that library, a photograph from 1925, with a woman who looks like Clara, and a man who might be tied to the manor's past." Raymond's eyes widened. "A photograph? That's juicy. And 1925, that's when the fire happened, isn't it? The one where Evelyn Weston vanished?" Miss Marple nodded, pleased he remembered. "Exactly. I found a journal in the library, 2 hidden in a secret room. It was Evelyn's, talking about her inheritance and a man named Charles. I think Langley knows something about it, or about her. He's no doctor, I'm sure of that. Could you look into him, Raymond? You've got friends in London, people who know things. Find out who he is, what he was doing in 1925. Raymond grinned, sipping his tea. "You're a sly one, Aunt Jane. I'll make some calls, see what I can dig up. What's his full name?" "Dr. Arthur Langley," she said, her needles moving. Steadily. He's about 60, I'd say, with glasses and a smooth way of talking. He's staying at the manor, but no one knows why. Not a relative, not a friend, something else. Raymond scribbled the name in a notebook, his pen flying. Arthur Langley. Got it. I'll ring up a few contacts there's, a chap at the newspaper, who owes me a favour, and another at the Public Records Office. If Langley's got a past, I'll find it. Anything else I should know. Miss Marple thought of the churchyard meeting, Edward's angry words about the truth about her, and Lily's story of Clara burning a map. Just be thorough, she said, and discreet. I don't want the Harrisons knowing we're looking. Raymond laughed. Discreet's my middle name, Aunt Jane. I'll have something for you by tomorrow, I promise. Now, tell me about this photograph. What's it look like? She described it. The woman with dark hair, so like Clara, the man with sharp features, the singed edges, the date 1925. It was hidden in a book, she said, like someone didn't want it found. And the journal mentioned a dispute over the manor, papers hidden away. I think it's all connected, the thefts, the fire, Langley. Raymond whistled softly. You've got a real mystery here, Aunt Jane. I'll get on it right away. But you be careful, poking around that manor. Sounds like they're hiding something big. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. I'm just an old lady with my knitting, Raymond. Who could be afraid of me? He laughed, finishing his tea and promising to call with news. After he left, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her needles clicking as she thought. Langley was the key, she was sure. His calm was a mask, hiding something tied to the manor's past. The photograph, Evelyn's journal, the hidden room, they all pointed to 1925, to a fire that wasn't an accident and a girl who vanished. And now, with the brooch and locket stolen, someone was stirring up that past, whether they meant to or not. The next day, Raymond called, his voice crackling through the phone. Aunt Jane, you're onto something. Arthur Langley's no doctor, he's a lawyer, or was, back in the 1920s, worked in London, handling property cases, including one about Willow Manor. It was a messy inheritance fight after the fire in 1925. Evelyn Weston was set to inherit, but there were others claiming the estate, distant cousins, I think. Langley represented them, and word is, he wasn't above bending the rules. Forged documents, maybe, or bribes. The case fell apart when Evelyn disappeared, and the manor was left empty. Langley dropped out of sight after that, no record of him. Practicing law again. Miss Marple's heart raced, but her voice stayed calm. How interesting, Raymond. Did your contact say anything about a man named Charles? Charles, Raymond paused. There was a Charles Dutton mentioned in the case, a young lawyer working with Langley. He was engaged to Evelyn, or so the gossip went, but he vanished. Around the time of the fire, no one knows what happened to him. Could be your man in the photograph. Miss Marple nodded, though he couldn't see her. Thank you, Raymond. You've been a great help. Let me know if you find anything else. She hung up, her mind spinning. Langley, a lawyer tied to the manor's inheritance fight. Charles Dutton. Evelyn's fiancé, gone without a trace. The photograph, showing a woman like Clara with a man who could be Charles. And now, Clara's own fiancé vanished years ago, according to Mrs. Bantry. Were they the same man? Or was there another connection, hidden in the manor's shadows? She opened her notebook and added a few words. Langley wire, Charles Dutton, inheritance fight. The puzzle was clearer now. but still incomplete. She thought of Edward, searching the library, and Langley's warning to stay out. Was Edward looking for the same papers she'd found, or something else? And the thefts, would they a cover, meant to distract from the real secret? Miss Marple spent the afternoon in her garden, tending her roses, but her mind was on Willow Manor. She'd need to get back to that library to look for more clues in the hidden room. And she'd watch Langley closer, now that she knew his past. The village was quiet, its cottages glowing in the evening light, but Miss Marple's mind was alive, weaving the threads of the mystery together, stitch by stitch. Chapter 11. The Confrontation. The afternoon sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden glow, making the village look like a picture from a storybook. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage, her knitting needles quiet for once, as she sipped a cup of tea, and thought about Willow Manor. The puzzle was growing, its pieces falling into place like stitches in her scarf. The stolen sapphire brooch and silver locket, the singed photograph from 1925, the hidden room with Evelyn Weston's journal, and Dr. Langley's past as a lawyer tied to the manor's inheritance, vital, pointed to a secret buried deep in the house's history. Edward's clandestine meeting with Langley in the churchyard, Lily's tale of Clara burning a map, and Raymond's discovery that Langley had worked with a man named Charles Dutton, Evelyn's vanished fiancé, had only tightened the knot. Miss Marple was sure the photograph, with its woman so like Clara and a man who might be Charles, was the key to unraveling it all. Today, the village was hosting a tea party at the vicarage, a yearly event where everyone gathered to chat, eat scones, and show off their best hats. It was the perfect place to watch people, to catch the glances and words that revealed more than they meant to. Miss Marple had decided to use the occasion to learn more about Clara Harrison, to see if she could shake loose a clue about the photograph or the thefts. She put on her best blue dress, the one with the lace collar, and pinned her grey hat with its little feather. Her knitting bag went over her arm, and her walking stick tapped lightly as she stepped out, keeping up her image as the village's harmless old lady. People talked freely around someone like that, and Miss Marple was counting on it. The vicarage lawn was bustling when she arrived, with tables covered in white cloths and plates of sandwiches, cakes, and scones. The vicar's wife, Mrs. Clement, flitted about, her smile bright as she greeted everyone. Mrs. Bantry was there, her red hat impossible to miss, chatting with Mrs. Weatherby about the latest village gossip. Miss Marple nodded to them, her eyes scanning the crowd. The Harrisons had come, as she'd hoped, Clara in a pale green dress, her blonde hair pinned under a wide hat, Mr. Harrison in a stiff suit, looking out of place, and Edward slouching at the edge of the lawn, his hands in his pockets. Dr. Langley was there too, his glasses glinting as he sipped tea, his calm smile never wavering. Miss Marple found a seat near the tea table where she could see everyone, without being noticed. Her knitting came out, the needles clicking softly as she worked on her scarf. It was a good spot, close enough to hear the chatter, far enough to seem unimportant. She watched Clara, who was talking to Mrs. Clement, her smile tight and her hands twisting her shawl. Mr. Harrison stood nearby, his face hard, nodding curtly to anyone who spoke to him. Edward kept his distance, his eyes darting to his mother and then away, as if he couldn't bear to look at her. Langley moved through the crowd, charming the ladies with his smooth voice, but Miss Marple noticed how his gaze lingered on Clara, sharp and calculating dot. Mrs. Bantry plopped down beside her, a plate of scones in hand. "Jane," she whispered, her eyes gleaming. "Look at them, the Harrisons." Clara's nervous as a cat, and Mr. Harrison's ready to bite someone's head off, and Edward sulky as ever. What do you make of it? Miss Marple's needles didn't stop. They're under a lot of strain, Dolly, she said, her voice mild. 2 thefts in a week would upset anyone. Mrs. Bantry snorted. It's more than that, and you know it. You've got that look, Jane. What did Raymond find out about Dr. Langley? Miss Marple glanced around, making sure no one was listening. He's no doctor, she said quietly. He was a lawyer in the 1920s, handling a case about Willow. Manor's ownership, Evelyn Weston was set to inherit, but there was a fight, and Langley was on the other side. He worked with a man named Charles Dutton, who was engaged to Evelyn and then vanished, just like her. Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened. Vanished, like Clara's fiancé, you mean? Oh, Jane, this is getting good. Do you think Langley's behind the thefts? I don't know yet, Miss Marple said, her needles clicking steadily. But he's hiding something, and so is Clara. I found a photograph in the Manor's library of a woman who looks like her, with a man from 1925, and there's a hidden room with Evelyn's journal talking about an inheritance dispute. It's all connected, Dolly. Mrs. Bantry leaned closer, her voice a whisper. You're going to trap them, aren't you? Oh, I wish I could see their faces when you do. Miss Marple smiled, but her mind was on Clara. She needed to talk to her to see how she reacted to the photograph. She waited until the crowd thinned, then made her way to Clara, who was standing alone by a rose bush, her shawl slipping off her shoulder. Double quotes, Mrs. Harrison, Miss Marple said, her voice warm. What a lovely party. Are you feeling any better after all this trouble? Clara's smile was weak, her eyes darting to the Manor in the distance. Oh, Miss Marple, you're so kind. I'm trying, but it's hard. First the brooch, now the locket. It's too much. Miss Marple nodded, pulling out a small handkerchief from her bag. Tucked inside was a sketch she'd made of the photograph, careful not to show the real thing. I found something in your library the other day, she said, holding it out. A picture from 1925, a woman who looks so like you, with a man. I thought it might be a family photo, maybe your grandmother. Clara's face went pale, and her hand froze on her shawl. A photograph, she stammered. I mean, it could be. We have old pictures, but I don't know them all. Miss Marple watched her closely, her eyes gentle but sharp. Clara's voice was too quick, her hands shaking. It was in a book, Miss Marple said, with singed edges, like someone tried to burn it. The date was 1925, and it said Willow Manor on the back. Do you know who it might be? Clara's eyes flicked to Dr. Langley, who was across the lawn, then back to Miss Marple. I don't. It's probably just an old relative. The Westons lived there then, didn't they? Maybe it's one of them. Miss Marple nodded, tucking the sketch away. Maybe. I just thought it was curious, with the fire and all. Evelyn Weston, you know she vanished that year. Such a sad story. Clara's smile was gone now, her face tight. Yes, sad, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Excuse me, Miss Marple. I need to check on something. She hurried away, her green dress fluttering, and Miss Marple watched her go. Clara was scared, that much was clear, and the mention of the photograph had done it. She'd looked at Langley, too, like he held the answers or the threat. Miss Marple's needles clicked as she returned to her seat, her mind racing. Clara knew something about the photograph, or about Evelyn, or both. She was just settling. Back when she heard a sharp voice said Edward, standing near the tea table, his face red with anger. He was talking to his mother, his words low but fierce. "Why do you keep lying?" he said, loud enough for Miss Marple to hear. "You know what's going on, and you won't tell me." Clara's hand flew to her mouth, and Mr. Harrison stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Edward, that's enough. Not here." But Edward didn't stop. "I'm sick of it," he snapped, his eyes flashing. "You and him," he jerked his head toward Langley, acting like nothing's wrong. "I know about the library, and I'm going to find it." He turned and stormed off, shoving through the crowd, leaving a stunned silence behind. Clara's face crumpled, and she fled toward the vicarage, Mr. Harrison following with a scowl. Langley watched them go, his calm mask slipping for a moment, showing something hard underneath. Mrs. Bantry was at Miss Marple's side in an instant, her voice a whisper. "Jane, what was that? Edward's onto something, isn't he?" Miss Marple's needles didn't stop. "He's angry, Dolly," she said, "and he's looking for something in the library, just like I thought. The same thing Langley doesn't want him to find." Mrs. Bantry's eyes gleamed. "The photograph, or that hidden room you mentioned?" "Maybe both," Miss Marple said, "but Clara's scared, and Langley's watching too closely. I need to get back to that library, too. See what else is there." The tea party went on, but the mood had shifted, the chatter quieter now. Miss Marple stayed until the sun began to dip, thanking Mrs. Clement for a lovely afternoon. As she walked home, her stick tapping the path, her mind was on Edward's outburst. He knew something, or suspected it, and it was tied to Clara and, maybe, to Langley. The photograph was the key, she was sure, but the hidden room held more, and she'd find it. Back in her cottage, she lit the fire and made tea, settling into her armchair with her knitting. She opened her notebook and added a few words. Clara photograph. Edward's anger. Library. The puzzle was clearer now, its pieces fitting together, but the picture was still incomplete. Tomorrow she'd talk to Inspector Craddock, see if he'd let her back into the manor, and she'd watch Langley, whose past as a lawyer tied him to Evelyn's disappearance. The village was dark now, its cottages quiet under the starry sky. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her needles clicking softly. The confrontation at the tea party had pulled another thread loose, and she was ready to follow it, stitch by stitch, to the heart of Willow Manor's secrets. Chapter 12. The vanished boy. The morning mist hung low over St. Mary Mead, softening the edges of the villagers' cottages and muffling the sounds of early chores. Miss Jane Marple stood at her cottage window, her knitting needles quiet, a cup of tea cooling on the table. Her mind was on Willow Manor, where the puzzle of the stolen sapphire brooch and silver locket had grown into something much bigger. The singed photograph from 1925, Evelyn Weston's journal from the hidden room, Dr. Langley's past as a lawyer, and Edward's angry outburst at the vicarage tea party all pointed to a secret rooted in the manor's fiery past. Edward's words, "I know about the library, and I'm going to find it," echoed in her thoughts, as did Clara's frightened reaction to the photograph and Langley's sharp warnings. Now, word had reached the village that Edward had vanished, leaving the manor in the night, and Miss Marple's heart was heavy with worry. She'd decided to visit the vicarage to look at old parish records, hoping to find something about Evelyn Weston or Charles Dutton, the man Raymond had linked to Langley and the 1925 inheritance fight. The records might mention the photograph's man, or shed light on the fire that took Evelyn. Miss Marple put on her simple grey dress, pinned her grey hat with its little feather, and tucked her knitting into a bag. Her walking stick tapped lightly as she stepped out, keeping up her image as the village's harmless old lady. People spoke freely around someone like that, and she needed every word she could get. The lane to the vicarage was quiet, the mist curling around the hedges like smoke. The village was buzzing with news of Edward's disappearance. Mrs. Weatherby had spread it at the post office, and Tom Baker was muttering about it as he swept his shop steps. Miss Marple nodded to them, her smile polite, but her mind was racing. Edward's outburst had been a spark, igniting something in the Harrisons' carefully guarded world. Had he run off to find the truth he'd hinted at, or had something or someone made him disappear? At the vicarage, Mrs. Clement greeted her with a warm smile, though her eyes were worried. "Miss Marple, how kind of you to come," she said, leading her to the parlour. "You've heard about young Edward, I suppose. Clara Harrison was here this morning, in tears. He left a note saying he was going away, but nothing else. The police are looking, but they don't know where to start." Miss Marple nodded, settling into a chair with her knitting. "It's very troubling," she said, her voice gentle. "I thought I might look at the old parish records, if it's no trouble. I'm curious about the Westons, who lived at Willow Manor years ago. It might take my mind off things." Mrs. Clement's eyebrows went up, but she didn't question it. "Of course, Miss Marple, the records are in the study some, go back centuries. I'll fetch the key." The study was a small, cosy room, its walls lined with books and a big oak desk piled with papers. Mrs. Clement unlocked a cabinet and pulled out a heavy ledger, its pages yellowed but neat. "These cover the 1920s, she said. "The Westons were prominent then. Let me know if you need anything." Miss Marple thanked her, her needles clicking as she opened the ledger. The records listed births, deaths, and marriages, with notes about the village's families. She found the Westons quickly Evelyn's birth in 1905, her parents' marriage, and a note about the fire in 1925. "Tragic loss of Evelyn Weston. Presumed dead," it read, but there was no death certificate, only a question mark. Miss Marple's heart gave a little jump. Presumed dead, but never confirmed. That matched the village gossip, some saying Evelyn ran off, others that she perished. She flipped to the marriage records, her eyes scanning for Charles Dutton. There it was, a note from 1924. Charles Dutton, solicitor, engaged to Evelyn Weston, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Weston of Willow Manor. The engagement was announced, but no marriage followed. Instead, a later entry noted Charles's disappearance in 1925, the same year as the fire. Miss Marple's mind raced. Charles was the man in the photograph, she was sure, standing beside Evelyn with his sharp features and serious eyes. But why had he vanished? And why was the photograph singed, hidden away like a guilty secret? She was about to close the ledger when a loose paper slipped out, a faded letter tucked between the pages. It was dated 1925, addressed to the vicar. From Evelyn's father, Mr. Weston. "My daughter's engagement to Charles Dutton is off," it read. "He is not what he seems. I fear for her safety and the manor's future. The inheritance must be protected." Miss Marple's breath caught. Charles wasn't trusted, even by Evelyn's father. And the inheritance was at stake, just as Evelyn's journal had said. She tucked the letter into her bag, careful to keep it hidden, and closed the ledger. Her knitting needles clicked as she thought, the sound a steady rhythm in the quiet room. Charles Dutton, engaged to Evelyn, tied to Langley's legal work, had vanished with her. The photograph, the journal, the hidden room, they all pointed to a fight over the manor, a fight that ended in fire and disappearance. And now Edward was gone, after shouting about the library and the truth about her. Was he looking for the same truth Miss Marple was chasing? She thanked Mrs. Clement and walked back to her cottage, her stick tapping the path. The village was alive now, with children playing in the lanes and Mrs. Bantry waving from her garden. "Jane," she called, hurrying over. "Have you heard? Edward's run off. Clara's beside herself, and Mr. Harrison's blaming everyone. What do you make of it?" Miss Marple smiled, her eyes gentle. "It's very worrying, Dolly. Young people can be impulsive, but I think Edward's looking for something. In the manor." Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened. "That library, you mean? The hidden room? Oh, Jane, you're onto something, aren't you?" "Maybe," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking as she walked, "but I need to be sure. The past is talking, Dolly, and we just have to listen." Back in her cottage, she lit the fire and made tea, settling into her armchair with her knitting. She opened her notebook and added a few words. Edward gone. Charles Dutton engaged, vanished, Western letter. The puzzle was clearer now, its pieces fitting together. Edward's disappearance wasn't random. He was chasing the same secret she was, the one tied to Evelyn, Charles, and the fire. And Langley, with his lawyer's past, knew more than he was saying. She thought of Clara, pale and frightened at the tea party, and the way she'd reacted to the photograph. Was she connected to Evelyn, maybe a descendant? Or was it her vanished fiancé, the one Mrs. Bantry had mentioned, who tied her to Charles Dutton? Miss Marple's needles clicked faster as she pieced it together. The theft's brooch and locket were distractions, meant to keep people looking away from the library, from the hidden room, from the truth. Tomorrow, she'd talk to Inspector Craddock, tell him just enough to get back into the manor. She'd need to see that hidden room again, to look for more papers, maybe something Edward had found, and she'd watch Langley, whose calm mask was slipping, revealing the sharp edges beneath. The village was dark now, its cottages quiet under the starry sky. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her needles clicking softly. Edward's disappearance had pulled another thread loose, and she was ready to follow it, stitch by stitch, to the heart of Willow Manor's secrets. Chapter 13. The boy in the library. The morning sun struggled through heavy clouds over St. Mary Mead, casting a grey light over the village's cottages and lanes. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cosy parlour, her knitting needles still, a pot of tea cooling on the table. Her mind was on Willow Manor, where the puzzle of the stolen sapphire brooch and silver locket had woven itself into a deeper mystery. The singed photograph from 1925, Evelyn Weston's journal from the hidden room, Dr. Langley's past as a lawyer tied to the manor's inheritance fight, and Edward's disappearance after his outburst at the tea party all pointed to secrets buried in the fire that took Evelyn in 1925. The parish records had confirmed Charles Dutton, Evelyn's vanished fiancé, as a key figure, and Miss Marple was sure the photograph's man was him. Edward's note, saying he was going away, had alarmed the village, but Miss Marple suspected he hadn't gone far. His talk of the library meant he was searching for the same truth she was. Today, she'd convinced Inspector Craddock to let her return to Willow Manor under the pretense of helping tidy the library. It was a chance to revisit the hidden room and look for more clues, especially after Lily's story of Clara burning a map and Raymond's revelation about Langley's shady legal past. Miss Marple, dressed in her simple grey frock, pinned on her grey hat with its little feather, and tucked her knitting into a bag. Her walking stick tapped lightly as she stepped out, keeping up her image as the village's harmless old lady. People let their guard down around someone like that, and she needed every advantage to unravel the manor's secrets. The lane to Willow Manor was damp from last night's rain, the air heavy with the scent of wet roses. The village was quieter than usual. The gossip about Edward's disappearance, hushed but persistent. Mrs. Weatherby waved from the post office, her eyes curious, and Tom Baker nodded from his shop steps, muttering about that boy causing trouble. Miss Marple smiled politely, her mind on the manor. Edward's outburst, "I know about the library, and I'm going to find it," had been a spark, and she was sure he was still close, hiding somewhere in that big house, at the manor's gates. She met Inspector Craddock, his dark hair neat despite the early hour, his notebook tucked under his arm. "Miss Marple," he said, a wry smile on his face. "I should have known you'd want to poke around again. You sure you're just here to tidy books?" "Oh, Inspector," she said, her voice mild, "I'm just an old lady who loves a tidy library, but if I notice anything, I'll tell you." He chuckled, leading her to the big oak door. "You always notice something. Come on, then. The Harrisons are in a state. Clara's crying, Mr. Harrison's shouting, and Langley's acting like it's all beneath him. No sign of Edward, though." The manor's hall was cold, its dark wood panels swallowing the light. Clara Harrison sat in the drawing room, her face pale, her hands clutching a handkerchief. Mr. Harrison paced by the fireplace, his voice sharp as he complained about the police's slow progress. Dr. Langley lounged in an armchair, his glasses glinting, his calm smile unshaken. Miss Marple's eyes flicked over them, noting Clara's trembling fingers, Mr. Harrison's clenched jaw, and Langley's watchful gaze. They were hiding something, and Edward's absence was making them nervous. "Miss Marple," Clara said, her voice breaking, "you're so kind to come. I'm so worried about Edward. He left that note, but we don't know where he's gone." There, Miss Marple said, patting her arm. "Young people can be impulsive. I'm sure he'll turn up. I thought I'd tidy the library, if it's no trouble. It might help take your mind off things." Mr. Harrison snorted. "Books won't find my son or my wife's jewels, but do what you want." Craddock nodded. "I'll be searching the grounds. Miss Marple, don't touch anything important." She smiled, her eyes twinkling. "Of course, Inspector." She made her way to the library, her knitting bag over her arm, her heart beating a little faster. The room was dim, its tall windows letting in grey light that danced on the dusty shelves. She moved to the bookshelf where she'd found the hidden room, her fingers brushing the spines as she hummed softly. The click of her needles was a comforting sound, one that made people think she was harmless, but her eyes were sharp, searching for the book that opened the secret door. She was about to pull the heavy leather volume when she heard a noisy soft thud, like a book falling. It came from the far corner of the library, near a stack of crates covered with a cloth. Miss Marple paused, her needle still, and listened. Another sound, a muffled cough, confirmed that someone was there. She moved quietly, her stick silent, on the rug, and lifted the cloth. There, curled up behind the crates, was Edward, his fair hair dishevelled, his eyes wide with fear. In his hand was a crumpled letter, its paper yellowed like the ones from the hidden room. "Edward," Miss Marple whispered, her voice gentle but firm. "What are you doing here?" he started, nearly dropping the letter. Miss Marple, I didn't run away. I had to stay, to find it. Find what? She asked, kneeling beside him, her eyes on the letter. Is that what you were looking for? He hesitated, then handed it to her, his hands shaking. I found it in the hidden room, behind the bookshelf. I heard Mr. Gibbs talking about it, and I knew there was something about her, about my mother. Miss Marple took the letter, her heart racing but her face calm. It was dated 1925. Addressed to Evelyn Weston from Charles Dutton. My dearest Evelyn, it read, Langley knows about the will. He's working with your cousins to take the manor, but I've hidden the papers where no one will find them. If anything happens to me, look in the priest hole. The truth is there. A second page, in a different hand, was a note from Langley himself, addressed to an unknown recipient. Dutton is a problem. The fire will solve it. The manor is ours. Miss Marple's breath caught. Langley tied to the fire, to Charles's disappearance, to Evelyn's vanishing. She looked at Edward, his eyes red but fierce. You think this is about your mother? She asked softly. He nodded, his voice low. She's hiding something. I heard her talking to Langley about the past, about things they don't want me to know. And this letter, it proves he's dangerous. Miss Marple folded the letter, tucking it into her bag. You're very brave, Edward, but very foolish. Hiding here won't help. You need to come out. Tell Inspector Craddock what you've found. He shook his head. They'll send me away. Langley Willie's already threatened me. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her voice was firm. I won't let that happen, but you must trust me. Stay here, and I'll get the inspector. She stood, her mind racing. The letter was the proof she'd been looking for, tying Langley to the fire, to Charles, to Evelyn. But it also raised questions. Why was Clara so scared? Was she connected to Evelyn or to Charles? And what did Edward know about his mother? She was about to leave the library when Dr. Langley appeared in the doorway, his glasses glinting in the dim light. Miss Marple, he said, his voice smooth but sharp, still fussing with books. I thought you'd be done by now. Dr. Langley, she said, her smile innocent. There's so much to see here, but I'm just about finished. His eyes narrowed, and she felt a chill. He knew she was close to something, she could tell. She clutched her knitting bag, the letter, hidden inside, and stepped past him, her stick tapping lightly. I'll see you in the drawing room, she said, her voice bright. She found Craddock outside, searching the garden, and told him about Edward, keeping her voice low. He's in the library, Inspector, hiding. He's found something, a letter. You'll want to see it. Craddock's eyebrows shot up, but he followed her back to the library. Edward was still there, pale but resolute, and he handed over the letter. Craddock read it, his face growing grim. This is serious. Miss Marple Langley's got some explaining to do. They returned to the drawing room, where Clara gasped at the sight of Edward. You're safe, she cried, rushing to him. But Edward pulled away, his eyes hard. I know what you've been hiding, he said, his voice shaking, and I'm not the only one. Langley stood, his calm mask slipping. What's this about? He demanded, but Craddock held up the letter. We need to talk, Mr. Langley, about 1925, and a fire that wasn't an accident. Miss Marple watched, her knitting in her lap, as the room erupted in chaos. Clara's tears, Mr. Harrison's shouts, Langley's protests. The puzzle was almost complete, its threads weaving together, and she was ready to pull the final stitch. Chapter 14. The truth unravelled. The late afternoon light filtered through the heavy curtains of Willow Manor's drawing room, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Miss Jane Marple sat in a velvet chair, her knitting needles clicking. Softly, her grey hat with its little feather tilted slightly as she watched the room. The air was thick with tension, the kind that comes when secrets are about to spill. Inspector Craddock stood by the fireplace, holding the yellowed letter Edward had found in the library's hidden room. Clara Harrison sat on the sofa, her face pale, her hands clutching a crumpled handkerchief. Mr. Harrison paced nearby, his jaw tight, his eyes darting between his wife and Dr. Langley, who stood in the corner, his glasses glinting, his usual calm replaced by a guarded stiffness. Edward sat near the window, his fair hair messy, his expression a mix of defiance and fear. The letter tying Langley to the 1925 fire and Evelyn Weston's disappearance had sparked chaos, and Miss Marple knew it was time to weave the threads of the mystery together. She'd spent the morning in her cottage, turning over the clues, the stolen sapphire brooch and silver locket, the singed photograph from 1925, Evelyn Weston's journal, Langley's past as a lawyer, and Edward's discovery of the letter, Lily's story of Clara burning a map, Raymond's research on Charles Dutton, and the parish records had all pointed to a truth buried in the manor's past. Now, with everyone gathered, Miss Marple was ready to explain, her voice gentle but firm, like a teacher guiding a class through a lesson. Inspector Craddock, she began, her needles pausing, you've been very patient with an old lady's fancies, but I think I can help make sense of this puzzle. It's a sad story, one that started long before the Harrisons came to Willow Manor. Craddock nodded, his notebook open. Go on, Miss Marple. That letter's got my attention, and I want to hear what you've pieced together. Clara's eyes widened, and Langley shifted, his hands tightening on his chair. Miss Marple's smile was kind, but her blue eyes were sharp, missing nothing. It begins with the fire of 1925, she said. Evelyn Weston, a young woman who was to inherit this manor, vanished that night. The village thought she died, but some said she ran away. I found her journal in a hidden room in the library, behind a bookshelf. She wrote of a fight over her inheritance. Her father's will left the manor to her, but distant cousins wanted it. Charles Dutton, her fiancé, was helping her protect it, but he vanished too. She paused, letting her words settle. Clara's handkerchief twisted tighter, and Mr. Harrison stopped pacing, his face hard. What's this got to do with us? He demanded. Miss Marple's needles clicked again. A great deal, Mr. Harrison. You see, I found a photograph in the library, dated 1925, showing a woman who looks remarkably like Mrs. Harrison, standing with a man Charles Dutton, I believe. The edges were singed, as if someone tried to destroy it. And then there's Dr. Langley, or rather, Mr. Langley, who was a lawyer in 1925, working for those cousins against Evelyn. Langley's voice was sharp. That's nonsense. I'm a guest here, nothing more. You've got no proof. Miss Marple held up a hand, her voice calm. The letter Edward found says otherwise. It's from Charles Dutton to Evelyn, warning her that you, Mr. Langley, knew about the will and were planning something. And there's a note in your hand, saying, the fire would solve the problem of Charles. The fire that night wasn't an accident, was it? You set it to destroy the will, to ensure the cousins got the manor. But Evelyn and Charles disappeared, and the manor was left empty. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That's That's awful, but why would it matter now? Miss Marple's eyes softened, but she didn't look away. Because you're connected to Evelyn, Mrs. Harrison. The photograph shows it. Your resemblance is too strong to be chance. I believe you're her granddaughter. Your mother must have been Evelyn's daughter, born after she fled the fire. Evelyn didn't die, she ran, taking the truth with her. And you came back to Willow Manor, perhaps not knowing the whole story, but knowing enough to be afraid. Clara's face crumpled, and she nodded, tears spilling. My grandmother. She told me stories about a fire, a manor, a lost inheritance. She said her name was Evelyn, but I thought it was just stories. When we moved here, I found papers in the attic, old letters about the manor. I didn't know what they meant, but Langley, he knew. He said they were dangerous, that I should burn them. Miss Marple nodded, her needle steady. The map, Lily. Saw you burn it was a plan of the manor, showing the hidden room, wasn't it? You were protecting the secret, but you didn't know how deep it went. Edward spoke up, his voice shaking. I found the papers too, in the library. I knew she was hiding something, and Langley was part of it. That's why I stayed. I had to find the truth. Mr. Harrison's voice was sharp. You should have told us, Edward. Running off, hiding like that. What were you thinking? Miss Marple's voice was gentle. He was trying to understand, Mr. Harrison, and he was right to be curious. The thefts, the brooch and the locket were a distraction, weren't they, Mr. Langley? You staged them to keep people looking away from the library, from the hidden room where the truth was hidden. Langley's face went pale, but he shook his head. You're making this up, old woman. You've got no evidence. Craddock stepped forward, holding the letter. This is evidence enough, Langley, and we'll search that hidden room again. If there's more, we'll find it. Miss Marple. Needles clicked faster. The brooch and locket were never stolen, were they? You hid them, perhaps in the manor, to stir up trouble and keep Edward from searching. But you didn't count on him finding the letter, or on an old lady noticing. A photograph. Clara sobbed, her voice breaking. I didn't know about the fire, not really. Langley said it was better to keep quiet, that the past should stay buried. He said the manor was ours, but only if no one looked too closely. Langley stood, his voice cold. You can't prove any of this. It's all stories, nothing more. Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but her eyes were steel. Stories have a way of being true, Mr. Langley. The photograph, the journal, the letter, they tell a story of greed and betrayal. You thought you'd won all those years ago when Evelyn and Charles vanished. But the truth doesn't stay. Hidden forever. Craddock nodded, his face grim. You're coming with me, Langley. We'll have a talk at the station, and my men will search the manor. Miss Marple, you've outdone yourself. She shook her head, her needles slowing. I'm just an old lady who notices things, Inspector. The manor told its own story. If you listened, the room fell silent as Craddock led Langley away, his protests fading down the hall. Clara clung to Edward, who looked shaken but relieved, and Mr. Harrison sank into a chair, his anger gone. Miss Marple tucked her knitting away, her work here done. The puzzle was complete, its threads woven into a clear picture. A fire set too. Steal an inheritance. A girl who fled to save her life, and a family caught in the echoes of that past. She walked home through the village, her stick tapping the path, the evening air cool and soft. St. Mary Mead was settling into dusk, its cottages glowing with lamplight. Miss Marple smiled to herself, thinking of her roses and her scarf, waiting for her. The manor's secrets were out, and the village would talk for weeks, but she was content. Puzzles, like knitting, always came together with patience and care. Back in her cottage, she lit the fire and made tea, settling into her armchair. She opened her notebook and wrote one last word. Solved. The case was closed, but St. Mary Mead would always have more stories, and Miss Marple would be ready to listen, stitch by stitch. Chapter 15. The manor's peace. The evening sun dipped low over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in soft hues of gold and pink. The air was cool, carrying the scent of roses and freshly cut grass, and the lanes were quiet, as if the village itself was taking a deep breath after the whirlwind of Willow Manor's secrets. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage parlour, her knitting needles clicking gently as she worked on her blue scarf, now nearly finished. A pot of tea steamed on the table, and the fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. Her mind, though, was still on the manor, where the puzzle of the stolen sapphire brooch and silver locket had unravelled, revealing a truth rooted in the fire of 1925. Dr. Langley's arrest, Edward's discovery of the incriminating letter, and Clara Harrison's tearful confession had brought the case to a close. But there were still a few threads to tie up. The village had been buzzing since yesterday's confrontation in the manor's drawing room. Mrs. Weatherby, the postmistress, had spread the news faster than a summer breeze, and by morning every shop and garden was alive with talk of Langley's treachery, Edward's bravery, and Miss Marple's quiet cleverness. She'd spent the day at home, letting the gossip swirl, but now, as the sun set, she was expecting a visitor, Inspector Craddock, who'd promised to stop by with the final pieces of the puzzle. The knock came just as the clock chimed 6, and Miss Marple opened the door to find Craddock, his dark hair slightly mussed, his notebook tucked under his arm. "Miss Marple," he said, a warm smile breaking through his tired face, "you've done it again. I thought you'd want to hear how it all wrapped up." She ushered him in, pouring tea into her best china cups. "You're very kind, Inspector. I'm just an old lady who likes a tidy ending. Do sit down and tell me everything." Craddock settled into a chair, sipping his tea. "We searched the manor top to bottom, as you suggested. Found the brooch and locket hidden in Langley's room, tucked inside a hollowed-out book. He'd staged the thefts to keep everyone distracted. Just like you said, he's confessed to that much, but he's still denying the fire. Says the letter was a misunderstanding, that he never meant harm to Evelyn Weston or Charles Dutton." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, her blue eyes gentle but sharp. "And do you believe him, Inspector?" Craddock shook his head. "Not a word. That letter you and Edward found its damning. The fire will solve it," he wrote. "We're digging into old records, but it's hard to prove arson after all these years. Still, we've got him on theft and fraud enough to keep him locked up for a while." She nodded, her mind turning over the case. The letter from 1925, found in the hidden room, had tied Langley to the fire that destroyed part of Willow Manor and led to Evelyn Weston's disappearance. Evelyn's journal and the parish records had confirmed her fight to keep the manor, against cousins backed by Langley, then a shady lawyer. Charles Dutton, her fiancé, had tried to help but vanished too, likely a victim of Langley's schemes. The photograph, with its singed edges and a woman so like Clara, had been the key, showing Evelyn's face and hinting at her survival. "What about the Harrisons?" Miss Marple asked, her voice soft. "How are they faring?" Craddock sighed, setting his cup down. Clara's shaken, but she's talking. She admitted you were right, she's Evelyn Weston's granddaughter. Evelyn didn't die in the fire. She fled, pregnant, and raised her daughter in secret. Clara grew up hearing stories of the manor, but didn't know the whole truth until she moved here. She found old letters in the attic, confirming her heritage, but Langley convinced her to keep quiet. He said the manor's ownership could be challenged if the truth came out. Miss Marple's needles paused, just for a moment. Poor Clara. She must have been so frightened, caught between her family's past and Langley's threats. She was, Craddock said. But Edward's the one who pushed her to talk. He's a sharp lad, that one. After finding the letter, he confronted her, and she broke down. Mr. Harrison didn't know the half of it. He thought the thefts were real. Thought Langley was just a family friend. He's angry, but mostly at himself for not seeing it. Miss Marple smiled faintly, thinking of Edward's sullen face and fierce courage. Young people can surprise you, she said. Edward was looking for the truth about his mother, and he found it, even if it hurt. Craddock nodded, his eyes warm. You saw it all, didn't you? The photograph, the hidden room, Langley's past. You put it together like one of your scarves. The village is calling you a hero, you know. She shook her head, her smile gentle. Oh, Inspector, I'm no hero. I'm just an old lady who notices things. The manor told its own story, if you listened. The photograph, the journal, the letter, they were there, waiting to be found. Craddock chuckled, standing to leave. Well, you've got my thanks. And the Harrisons. Clara asked me to tell you she's sorry for doubting Lily. They've offered her job back, and she's accepted. The manor's quiet now, or as quiet as it can be. Miss Marple saw him out, her stick tapping lightly as she returned to her chair. The fire crackled, and she picked up her knitting, her mind settling like the village outside. The case was closed. The brooch and locket returned, Langley in custody, and Clara's secret out. Evelyn Weston's story had come full circle, her granddaughter living in the manor she'd fought to keep. Miss Marple thought of the photograph, now safe with Clara, a reminder of a woman who'd survived against the odds. The next day, she walked to the vicarage to return the parish record letter she'd borrowed. Her steps slow and steady. Mrs. Bantry met her on the lane, her red hat bright against the grey sky. Jane, she called, her eyes gleaming. You've solved it, haven't you? The whole village is talking about Langley and the fire. Tell me everything. Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking as they walked. There's not much to tell, Dolly, just an old story that needed telling. The manor's at peace now, and so are the Harrisons. Mrs. Bantry snorted. Peace. With you around, Jane, there'll be another mystery by next week. You're too good at this, Miss Marple. Eyes twinkled, but she said nothing, letting her friend chatter on. Back in her cottage, she lit the fire and made tea, settling into her armchair with her scarf, now just a few rows from finished. She opened her notebook, looked at the single word from yesterday's Ovdand, closed it with a satisfied nod. St. Mary Mead was quiet again, its secrets laid bare, but Miss Marple knew there'd always be more, hidden in the shadows of old houses or the whispers of the village. The stars came out, twinkling over the cottages, and Miss Marple sipped her tea, her needles clicking softly. The case of the hidden photograph was over, but her garden, her knitting, and her sharp eyes were ready for whatever came next, stitch by stitch.